The Legend of Heroes. Oh, Legend of Heroes. More specifically, the Trails series. One that needs no introduction if you're even remotely familiar with the JRPG landscape. In my case, I started Kiseki in March of 2021 with Sky FC back when I was just 14 years old. 4 years and 2 months later, in May of 2025, I finished the latest entry, Kai no Kiseki, or Trails Beyond the Horizon, which also marks the first time I have ever been fully caught up with the series. A milestone that seemed completely unfeasible all those years ago. Ever since FC, Kiseki has been a constantly recurring series throughout my early and mid-teenage years. One that's brought me everything from excruciating frustration and cringe to immense happiness, and everything in between, which had a tremendous effect on my development as a person and shaping me into who I am now. But enough with the sentimental stuff for now, as I need to get to the point of this video. You're likely wondering the same things my friends have been for the past few months. Why in the hell are you doing this? And why specifically Daybreak 1? To put it shortly, for the former, I'd like this project to serve as a sort of personal documentation, I guess. A place to leave behind whatever's on my mind at the time, and maybe look back at it fondly in a couple or few years. As for the latter, it pretty much happened by pure coincidence, actually. Daybreak 1 just so happened to be the right game at the right time for me. Which of course relates to the title of this video and its main goal. A video essay where I can explore why this game in particular had such an immensely profound effect on my consciousness. But before I tell you immediately why and render the remaining runtime of this video pointless, I need to give some background, of course. You see, before playing Reverie, Daybreak 1, Daybreak 2 all consecutively back to back, I was in a bit of a drought when it came to playing video games. Before this streak, I had finished only 5 games in 2024 from January all the way till the end of September, which was not my usual rate whatsoever, and by that point it had been 1 year since I finished Cold Steel 4. Playing single-player video games had become stale to me, so much so that I even went back to playing gacha games for a bit, which may as well be the gaming equivalent of getting back together with your ex for the 3rd time. Anyways, more to the point, the novelty of picking up a new single-player game and enjoying it all the way through was starting to wear off for whatever reason I just wasn't aware of. But it wasn't all bad though. During that period of time, I had a pretty great experience with Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, and surprisingly, Dark Souls 2. Funnily enough, Dark Souls 2 taught me that many misconceptions, completely made-up quotes, and baseless critiques can really just spawn mostly from one critique video on YouTube and change the entire reputation of a game for the worse. It was exactly because of this perception that I went into Dark Souls 2 that same year with the mindset of, well, I only have 2 games left to finish in the Souls series, so might as well just get this one out of the way already. Instead, what I got was something very special. While I wouldn't rank DS2 in the upper echelons on my personal Souls game ranking, I had so much fun while playing it. I loved the combat, areas, atmosphere, aesthetic, and I also didn't even need to watch a Vati video to understand and appreciate the lore and story in the moment. There undeniably are aspects of the game that are questionable, but that hasn't stopped me at all from looking past them and remembering this game fondly. The potential was clearly there for a game that could reach even greater heights, but unfortunately the development of Dark Souls 2 was plagued by many issues. And I wasn't the only one who thought this way, as my friends who were playing it at the same time as me also agreed that they hadn't expected Dark Souls 2 to be such a treat. Going through this experience was so liberating because after many years of thinking that I did understand this concept, I finally realized how to actually articulate my own opinions about video games and, more broadly speaking, art, instead of just relying and falling back on the wide consensus or videos, reviews, and critiques that have a lot of views and upvotes to formulate my totally legitimate own quote-unquote opinion based on what was described and whether it sounded convincing enough, regardless of the actual validity of the review or critique. But even with this breakthrough and a month later finishing the Souls Gauntlet by beating Demon Souls, I still felt like something was missing. That the puzzle had started to form, but I was still missing the last few pieces to get rid of that uneasy feeling that was still lingering in my mind. This dark cloud persisted for about a month, even while having fun with Demon Souls, and I wanted nothing more than to find out exactly what was bothering my consciousness. But as I now know, this was going to take a lot longer than I thought it would. That being said, what helped me to jumpstart my playthroughs of Reverie and Daybreaks 1 and 2 a month after this was like an RKO out of nowhere. It was this video. I don't even remember nor really understand how it appeared on my homepage at the time, as I had been on a year-long hiatus from the series, but it was really fucking good. Besides it being a ranking of some of the best music in the Trails series that I hadn't listened to in a while and greatly missed, some tracks came alongside video packages that showed the story of the songs in tandem with the notes. The result was nothing short of astounding to me. It was awesome. However, since I hadn't played Reverie, Daybreak 1, and Daybreak 2 at the time, I couldn't watch many of the highest ranked ones, so what left me with the biggest source of inspiration were tracks from the games I had, like Majestic Roar, The End of Saga, Hollow Light of the Sealed Land, Spiral of Erebos, and so on. It made me want to know what these other tracks were and the story that surrounds them, so I took the next logical step, which was to immediately start Reverie, and I really liked it. It felt like a return to form for me, and I got to experience those tracks that I had seen the titles of in the video, and they were really damn good. I was back in the comfort zone of a series that I had already settled into quite a while ago, and ready to begin the game this video is about, Trails Through Daybreak 1. The reason it is Daybreak 1 and why it couldn't be anything else is because this game made me experience such a wide range and mixture of feelings that mentally left me in a bind for quite a while. It left me feeling uncertain and reflective, while also at the same time great and thankful for the story I had just witnessed come to a conclusion. Due to the way I felt, I immediately hopped into Daybreak 2 without even waiting for the official release, even though it was only 2 months away at the time, because I just had to see the continuation of this story to search for answers to find out if I had maybe missed something or that it was some weird one-time fluke. But Daybreak 2 is not the main subject today, so I won't say much on it. This entire sequence of events changed me so much that after finishing Daybreak 2, I started doing something completely unprecedented for me. For the first time ever, I started writing about my thoughts on the games I had played. In Google Sheets, of course. And what I wrote there was nothing short of a complete nightmare that makes my skin crawl reading it now. Hence the reason why I'm actually too embarrassed to show the text right now. Yeah, even though it was pretty bad, it was at least a start of some kind. Since I hadn't ever done something like this before, I was so surprised to find out how fun it was, and how I could sink many hours into it endlessly. With it, I nurtured my writing and critical thinking, and a few months later after I finished Beyond the Horizon, I knew I was ready to put those unshakable doubts to rest, which is what spurred me to make this in the first place. If Dark Souls 2 was my first lesson where I learned the fundamentals of thinking for myself and forming my own opinions about video games, then unbeknownst to me, Daybreak 1 was my first test on whether I could authentically apply that lesson to a series I really liked and had invested over 700 hours into. Obviously, this video is about Daybreak specifically, but I absolutely have to mention Reverie's final daydream, Beyond the Reverie, because it's very important. After completing all the post-game floors and defeating the true final boss, this is one of the rewards you get. At the time I was playing Reverie, Daybreak had already been released, so it was a given that I jump into it right after. I was already eager to start playing the Calvardark because of how promising it looked, but this memory orb heightened that excitement even further, because it had set up the next game so well. There are 3 separate memories you can view, and while they are all great, the one that stands out the most by far is Forward Sword in Hand. I love this daydream so much so that it's probably my most favorite moment in the entire game, though that might be more to do with the fact that I'm a sucker for when video games temporarily go into a visual novel presentation. As for the daydream itself, the protagonist of it is Elaine, who makes her very first appearance in the series. We first find out that she is a very capable bracer, but is also incredibly unwilling to accept a promotion for A rank. Elaine doesn't want to accept it because she thinks that the Bracer Guild is overestimating her, even though it's very obvious to everyone around her, including the eventual S-rank Bracer Zin, that she's definitely worthy of it. After arguing with him about it and bringing up his own reluctance to accept a promotion to S-rank, realizing that it would be hypocritical to force Elaine to accept, he drops the topic for now. After the exchange, Elaine goes into a bar, where she asks the bartender for information on the case she is working on. The case involves 2 children who were allegedly kidnapped after witnessing a drug exchange. With very little info available due to the Bracer Guild's strict code, and pressure mounting to find them as quickly as possible, Elaine is reminded of her childhood friend who recently returned to the capital city Edith a few years after suddenly disappearing, now working as a fixer who skirted the line of legality. With no leads on the case and with her childhood friend bothering her mind, she is lost. But that's when another childhood friend of hers comes into the bar. After reminiscing about the past while also mentioning the childhood friend who had turned a blind eye to them both, and a bit of friendly banter, the friend who now works for the Calvert Intelligence Department tells Elaine that the CID have found the location of the group who kidnapped the children. Elaine is immediately reinvigorated because of the news, and sets off alongside the guild and the police to rescue the kids. But on the inside, she is also terrified. With this in mind, she begins her part of the raid on the criminal base. There, she easily defeats every mafioso and confronts the leader, who admits that the children are safe and in another room deeper inside the hideout. Elaine is shocked by this, but she also realizes that she had just made a very careless mistake. She then returns to the office, where she now sees that the leader has also been killed, with his corpse being held up by a monstrous sword which pierced through his chest. That same sword being held by someone who had camouflaged themselves. Elaine orders the murderer to tell her who they are, to drown out her fear with raw anger. Albeit while still camouflaged, we find out that the murderer is an arrogant man who spoke as though he thought he was above everyone else. Although Elaine gave it her all, it was obvious the still camouflaged man had no chance of losing to her. With no more opportunities to win against him, Elaine resorts to asking what his goal is. But her work here wasn't finished. She went on to the next room to find the brother and sister who were kidnapped. The boy was trembling on the floor, while his sister stood close by. Elaine gently approached the children, assuring them that everything was okay and that they were now safe. However, as she approached them, the boy shook his head vigorously. His whole body trembled out of fear. At that very moment, Elaine remembered the words from that man. The fear instilled would not allow the boy to stop trembling, even as Elaine approached even closer to the point where she was within arm's length of him. Elaine told the boy that it's alright, just as she grasped the knife that was being thrust towards her. The one holding the knife was the boy's sister. She was a bit startled that Elaine had stopped her attack, but barely reacted as she stared blankly forward without emotion. Elaine admits that the man was right about fear and how it controls people. It's clear that the children were mentally scarred by whatever transpired here at the base, and because of that fear, they were conditioned to attack anyone who came to their rescue. However, Elaine also recognizes that people are capable of fighting fear and overcoming it. All along, the brother was trying to warn Elaine that his sister was going to attack her, which proved that he had not fully succumbed to fear. Elaine comforted the children, and the sister finally realized that she was here to rescue them, and couldn't hold back the tears, as Elaine states that she has finally been liberated of her fear. But Elaine could not say the same for herself. She was still too afraid to confront her past. However, after the encounter with the children, Elaine realized that things had to change, and that she needed to address the past that has been tormenting her. In contrast to all the other visuals we saw thus far, which were hard to see and in black and white, this one shines brightly with color, while also showing us the childhood friend Elaine has yet to confront. As the first step forward, she finally accepts her promotion to become an A-rank bracer. I love it whenever the Trails series goes into a sort of visual novel-esque mode. It gives the writers a great opportunity to really flesh out a character and communicate to us exactly how they feel with very specific details. Unlike games or movies which can show and tell us everything directly, text-centered fiction necessitates the reader to engage in the story they are reading and to visualize what is not given. Another moment in the series that takes advantage of this is of course Star Door 15 from Sky 3rd. That scenario simply would have never worked with in-game chibis or sprites. This daydream is also great because it raises questions, which we desperately want answers to. Who is A and its merciless leader? Will Elaine be able to confront her past and resolve things? What did her childhood friend do to cause this situation in the first place? They look back to look forward, and beyond the Reverie memory orbs had me hooked for hours at the tail end of my Reverie playthrough. And there was no doubt in my mind that I had to start Daybreak 1 as early as I possibly could. Not only that, I was incredibly excited knowing that the Calvert arc had the reputation of being more mature, paired together with the fact that I had seen footage of the game where it looked significantly less saturated and vibrant than Cold Steel 3, 4, and Reverie, giving off a more serious tone rather than those games which I personally think went too far. I preferred the more balanced palette that I had long associated with the Trails series, which was present in Sky, Crossbell, and early Cold Steel. Because of this wishful thinking, it eventually made me start to ponder about some other things that I didn't like about this series, which I also hoped would be rectified. And then that led me down a rabbit hole of me finding a whole lot of things to complain about. Now, despite having played every Trails game and being infatuated with the lore of Zemuria and the series as a whole, so much so that it was enough to make me buy every single collector's edition after Cold Steel 2, there is still a lot of things I dislike about this series. So, this got me thinking. Because of this whole dilemma, I created my very own unsophisticated list of gripes with the series, where I don't really analyze beyond the surface too much of why I personally find these issues annoying. This will be very short, I assure you. Okay, so, number 1, lack of tension in confrontations against villains or antagonists, whether due to a lack of stakes, or the classic, we want to test your resolve, for the millionth time. Number 2, terrible comedy. This series by itself keeps reminding me that in Japan, the accidental pervert comedy shtick, or just cheap fan service, is still extremely popular. Number 3, Angelica. Okay, more specifically, just awful characters that give off this feeling like that one Drake meme. Number 4, the lack of extreme consequences for major events or mistakes. Number 5, romance. Oh my god. Romance options as a concept entirely, please go away and never come back. Number 6, constant plot armor. Number 7, not so fast, that won't be necessary. Looks like I made it just in time. Stop right there. This cliche is the reason why I can't stand sort of biting Gale. It's never going to stop making me want to hit myself in the head with a brick every time this happens, at least like 10 times in each game. Number 8, awkward and agonizingly slow model movements of the Cold Steel era that made scenes look incredibly goofy and unserious when it desperately needed to be the opposite. And lastly, number 9, back-to-back fake deaths in the same arc. Hey, editor me here. Now I'm going to redo this part because fake deaths is too broad of a term when my complaint is more specific than just that. Because for example, obviously Crow actually does die at the end of Cold Steel 2 and comes back as an undead, so you can't actually coin that just a fake death. In this case, what I'm going to refer to as fake deaths is Cold Steel constantly playing this game of leading you to believe that someone is going to actually die, or is probably dead, but then literally all of them come back. Crow, Angelica, Emperor Eugens, Olivier, Victor, Toval, and Milliam all survive, regain their mortality or body by the end of Cold Steel 4. That's 7 characters in just 3 games that had a, in quotations, fake death angle. Not to mention that this was done with Crow 3 times in total. Now of course I don't mind a fake death angle, in fact I quite like what they did with Crow up to Cold Steel 3. However, I don't think I need to elaborate further on why doing it so many times is unbelievably obnoxious, because repeating the same outcome over and over and over again eventually becomes desensitizing and numb. And it doesn't get better when you take into account that only 1, debatably 2, major characters, not counting undeads, actually die in these 3 games. Alright, I'm done with this shtick now. Okay, so with all of that, I think it's fair to say I was placing a bunch of high expectations on this game and the Calvert arc. Of course, I wasn't expecting most of them to be remedied, because most of these issues are just hard-coded into the series' DNA at this point. But regardless, I was still hoping that something like that would happen, because I felt like Beyond the Reverie ticked all the boxes as to what I personally would ideally want from a Trails story. Maybe during that time I just wanted Trails Through Daybreak to be exactly just like those daydreams, because I had deluded myself that something like it would be the norm going forward. Of course, almost no game ever will pan out how you imagine it before playing, but I was still hopeful. And even with these personal gripes, I still like the series. That's why I played 13 of them. In any case, with the whole backstory exposition done, all that's left now is to actually talk about the game this video is about. It was incredibly rewarding to start the game just a day after finishing Reverie and find out that my interpretation of Edith and by extension Calvert from Forward Sword in Hand was actually spot on. A beautiful lively city on the surface, but one that also has a dark criminal underworld lurking right below, causing trouble for the entire populace, like the corrupt politician and his son in Ren's daydream, and of course Almada in Elaine's episode. This actually reminded me of Crossbell at the beginning of Zero, because of its portrayal as a troubled state stuck in between 2 super countries, with corruption also running rampant. Crime was a regular occurrence, so much so to the point where the police couldn't keep up with it during that time. This scenario allowed the SSS to serve as a symbol of hope for Crossbell, because it desperately needed a group like them at that time. But whereas Lloyd is someone who strictly adhered to the law or broke it for the sake of justice, similarly to Estelle and Rain, our new protag this time evidently wasn't cut from the same cloth. And I think we can all agree that this is the main reason why we were so open to Van as the new protagonist for this saga. He feels much more believable and nuanced than someone like Rain or Lloyd, who on the surface come across as overly goody two-shoes characters. Even though I don't agree with that label completely, I obviously do understand the sentiment and why people feel that way. At the very least, it's totally understandable that after 7 games, that many players, including myself, would want a fresh and new main character who has a different outlook and moral code. After consulting with Agnes on her request, they head out in search of an informant in the Riverside district, where we get our first proper look at Edith outside of the Old Town district and the scene from the introduction. I really like this theme. It has this modern and distinctly urban feel coupled with a relaxing melody that to me sounds like shopping mall music, but I can't help but feel it was perfect to encapsulate Edith's surface tone. For me, my favorite part of being in Edith was just hearing this track while playing, and because of it I had so much fun exploring the city. The capital itself looks sleekly modern, yet still classically elegant. What adds to its charm even further is its distinct rapid development in technology seen throughout the entire city, like an entire subway network, big monitors, cars everywhere, and official broadcasts. By Daybreak 2, I had already gotten used to Edith being more modern than almost any city we have ever visited in Trails. But I remember how weird it was initially since I had gotten used to the medieval style of Erebony and Liberal for so long at that point. Crossbell City is the closest comparison to Edith, but the sheer size, the contrast between districts, and its fusion of different cultures is what differentiates them so much. Anyways, next topic. Van paired together with Agnes in this chapter was such a great idea. Their dynamic is so good at showing us the difference between the two and highlighting both of their unique traits. Agnes is a young and upstanding citizen who is relatively inexperienced with underworld procedures, yet is determined to accomplish her goal of collecting the Genesis even if she has to resort to skirting the line of legality. Van, on the other hand, is the mature and experienced veteran who takes all things to account and doesn't miss the important details. This stark difference is highlighted in their interaction with Giacomo at Riverside. After not being able to convince Agnes to have him work on finding the Genesis that was stolen, he accidentally gives away the vital piece of information that lets Van determine that Giacomo was feigning ignorance, and he did actually know something about the Genesis, whereas Agnes didn't pick up on it at all. They end up following him down into the underground maintenance tunnel, where another very underrated track plays. Agnes says that she had no idea that this was what it looked like under the city, and that there were monsters in Edith at all. That's why I like to think that this track has a sense of finding out an intriguing secret with a slightly ominous undertone, signifying that this is a dangerous place roaming with monsters, contrasting with how safe Edith appears on the surface. Since the place is roaming with monsters, Van tells Agnes to leave things to him. However, she already came prepared for this exact scenario. In reality, his initial decision to keep her out of potential danger should be the correct one, but he reluctantly agrees and warns her to proceed with caution. The sewer serves as a combat tutorial, but what follows after it is one of the most surprising scenes in the entire series. Giacomo gets murdered by 2 Armada members, and they did not shy away from showing how one-sidedly brutal this was. The reason I say this is so surprising is because a scene like this one would have never happened in the previous setup games so early. It highlights Daybreak's more mature tone very early and reminds us that Mafias and Calvert do not mess around. Anyways, our duo get caught in the middle of the crime scene and are brought to the police station. Again, this dynamic is just awesome. Agnes is worried as hell, while on the other hand, Van is shoving his finger in his ear while making fun of the cops. After that, Kincaid bails them out, and we find out that he and Van have history. Renee even mentions a very touchy subject for Van, and from this we can easily identify Kincaid to be the other childhood friend from Elaine's daydream in Reverie. Their conversation is really short, and they take a few jabs at each other. From Van's intonation and Renee poking at him, it's easy to tell that they are the type of friends who see each other as rivals. Of course, only in a friendly sense, though. Then, Marielle appears, and she's annoying, so naturally Van feeds her a lie so she can go bother the police. While at Bermotti's, Van gets the location of Giacomo's bases from Dingo. With it, they can go retrieve the Genesis he stole, and oh shit, she's already here.
Oh.
Yeah, I did not expect them to introduce Elaine so early into the game. Their conversation is so awkward and full of tension, which is hardly surprising given what we know from the daydream and Reverie. Despite that, it still does also present a bit more context in the situation. What we find out is that it's a very difficult subject to approach given Van's neglect to confront it, and Elaine avoiding the subject, not even mentioning anything about it. Later, on the subway going to Central Station, they figure out which base likely holds the Genesis. However, unlike last time, Van had already made up his mind on whether to allow Agnes to accompany him. Since a murder has now occurred and a really dangerous group is likely involved, he simply tells Agnes to go home and let him take care of it by himself. That much would be enough to convince most people to leave it to him.
I thought I told you to get off at the next stop.
You'll have to forgive me for being selfish.
Though there isn't a flaw in his reasoning, the memento means way too much to Agnes, to the point where she's willing to go through with the risk. Throughout this prologue, Agnes' central characteristic on display has been her resolve. The main trait that started this whole quest of searching for the Geneses was Agnes' persistence to find them, whereas many others would have been okay with Van retrieving it alone. I think I speak for everyone that even though her request is brash, it's hard not to sympathize with Agnes during this scene. Her plea to Van radiates with steadfast conviction, not founded by recklessness.
But you have to understand just how much that memento means to me. It's something that connects me not just to my great-grandfather, but my mother and grandmother too. And that's not the only reason I want to see this through now. A man is dead. I know you don't like the idea, but I feel like I have to be a part of this. Whatever may come to happen. I'll do everything I can to ensure my own safety, and I'll do everything you ask in the field. So please, won't you let me come with you?
Van notices this as well and allows her to accompany him, though only if she upholds his conditions. Ordinarily, he would not comply with just about anyone if they made a similar request, but he can tell Agnes is capable. Cute moment here as Ren is spying on our duo to make sure things go smoothly. About halfway through the dungeon, Agnes realizes that in their first meeting, Van was trying to disincentivize her from working with him, since he had a hunch Almada was involved. At first, Van was trying really hard to get Agnes to reconsider contracting him, but she clearly didn't want to, as the police or Bracer Guild wouldn't have been suitable options for her request. Though luckily for her, she came prepared with a gift recommended by her purple-haired friend. An Andalusia limited edition tart, more specifically. And Van partially accepts the request because he loves sweets too much. Now, on the surface, this may just seem like a common anime haha moment, but after getting to know Van after 3 games, this is just standard for him. Despite his warnings to Agnes, he is a big softie, who probably on the inside still wanted to help her, likely because of her sincerity in their discussion. Helping others is an essential part of Van's nature. He can't help but lend a hand to well-intentioned people, so it's very cute that in contrast to his cool and stoic demeanor, he is actually very compassionate. Once they arrive at their destination, fantastic, it's right there. I wish I could talk more about the sequence of events, but I can't. What is clear though is that the Genesis saving Van and Agnes here is not a random out of nowhere deus ex machina. There are reasons why that happened and many more times later on, and also why Grendel and Mare are connected to the Geneses. But we will have to leave that for another time.
This is clearly only the beginning of something much greater. Sharpen your skills while you can, Van.
Will do, Renee.
Kincaid.
I can't let him keep living like this. Why must you insist on shouldering all of the burden yourself?
The capital city Edith's disparity on full display, Agnes and Van's dynamic, the music used, re-establishing ongoing scenarios we heard about before only in text, and intriguing mysteries raised. I was hooked by this prologue from start to finish, which made the game seem as promising as I had hoped the first time I played it. Daybreak's prologue is simply amazing, and this analysis led me to remember why I liked it so much in the first place, with the added context of having finished Horizon not too long ago. Anyways, that was most of my thoughts on the prologue. From here on out, I won't be following the chronology of events in every chapter as attentively as I did here. I'm going to be skipping the Edith portions most of the time because either there isn't too much important stuff to mention, or I don't have anything else to say on it, and also because I don't want to bloat this video even further than I already have. It's hard not to look back on our time in Cray without remembering what ultimately happened later on. At the end of Chapter 2, Melchior mentions that he found an ideal venue for something. Even though the plan to detonate a nuclear weapon in Cray wasn't set in stone yet by Chapter 2, its fate was pretty much already sealed when Melchior arrived and noticed its potential. Also, to clear things up, because I actually misled you with that opening, the song Melchior whistled was actually not La Aurasianaise, the old anthem of Calvard, which Gerard whistled in Cray. In the final chapter during the memorial service, a choir sings the exact same hymn, which we heard Melchior whistle. As Kondo stated in an interview, Melchior, while whistling during that moment, was imagining the aftermath of Cray's destruction, how the choir would sing to honor the people of Cray, which is horrifying to think about, especially since our trio, except maybe Van, had the opposite impression when they heard Melchior's whistling. As for Cray, it's an agricultural village famous for its scenery. The luscious, vibrant green noticeable everywhere, the buckwheat fields, and the Middle Ages architecture made of gray stone that contrasts so well with the surrounding nature creates a pleasant atmosphere. It's a very cozy place full of charm, which is hard to dislike and is especially refreshing to see after getting out of the very modern Edith. Sister Belicia also mentions that it's a very tight-knit community, which is accepting of all people no matter what. Each person you can talk to in this place is very polite and willing to share with outsiders like the Solutions Office, who only recently just arrived. Cray is a place which any person with at least bare minimum morals can respect and appreciate. And because of that, I think there's little doubt that Melchior also noticed the appeal of this village, which ultimately led him to deciding that it would be the perfect area for Almada's plan. After all, there's no better way to make every faction and party in the whole country put a target on your back than annihilating an innocent village like Cray. Fairy is the new arrival for this chapter. She's the youngest member of the ASO, and initially I did have worries that this would work to her detriment, but it actually didn't. She's at that perfect point in the middle where she's not incredibly dumb, but also is not a young, obnoxious super genius. She is reasonably mature and intelligent for her age, especially for a person who is unfamiliar with life in the big cities. After this, Van accepts Fairy's request to find Ada and her unit, who they determined were near Cray, with also little help from the Genesis again. They spend most of the afternoon trying to find clues to Ada's whereabouts. The sun starts setting, and this is the point where they find Melchior whistling that hymn I talked about earlier. Following this, Walter shows up, uninvited to the room at the inn, and makes quite the first impression after not being present for a long time in this series.
Sharp as always, Arkwright, and I can tell one of your companions is quick on the uptake.
After seeing him in trailers, I was quite curious as to how he would be treated here, since personally he didn't leave a big impression on me in Sky, but his first scene quickly shows how much his presentation differs for the better in 3D, with voice acting and a very tense scenario. Even if it's a very small detail, I still have to also mention how I really like that instead of only telling us that Fairy and Agnes were scared, they actually bothered to show it visually too by having Fairy fall down to her knees immediately after Walter leaves. So anyways, the reason Walter is here is because he's after Melchior, which I will get to a bit later. But to sum up, this reintroduction to Walter flipped my perception of him completely for the better, and I think this was the perfect scenario to show off his unique traits. Following their encounter with him, they find Ada near the village and follow her to the hillside near Cray, where at the top they find her alongside her undead comrades. Ada reveals that 10 days ago, Melchior, Ariok, and Olympia slaughtered everyone in Ada's unit and brought them under the second Genesis, which glowed with an ominous dark red light. Almada used the Genesis to resurrect Ada's squad and herself into ghouls. Her squad lost all sense of will and acted out of a beastly instinct. However, mysteriously, only Ada retained her free will. Even Melchior mentions that he doesn't know exactly why Ada alone was the exception, though right after he says that it may simply be because Ada had a stronger will than everyone else. Though honestly, I wonder if that's really true. Ada also noted that she tried multiple times to climb up to the Genesis, but her body always locked up as she got closer to it, as if her body was being controlled by an unseen force, which makes me question even further what in the world Almada even did for it to operate this way. As I have highlighted here, there is a noticeable amount of unexplained mystery surrounding the Genesis and their influence on the story. For me, the details got kind of lost in the middle of the story while playing, and I was always very confused on how exactly these things work. The specifics on how exactly the Genesis cause things like Grendalization, Mare becoming sentient, and other events are the most prominent mysteries in the game that aren't even revealed by the end. However, in a section later in this video, I will go over some of the information we have on the Genesis, from Daybreak 1 specifically. More importantly, the circumstances are grim in this situation. Ada plans to kill everyone in her unit and herself, so they don't end up killing innocent civilians once she also loses control. A noble act of sacrifice. We have seen in previous games that undead or temporary immortals can be given life once more. However, the power of the 7 Divine Knights is not present here, meaning that either way, Ada and her core cannot be saved and brought back to human form as they have already been killed. On the other hand, Agnes brings up that Ada hasn't been completely sincere in her explanation, and has disregarded Fairy's feelings completely, even though they are so close to the point where they both see each other as sisters. Though Ada was going to burn everyone, she does admit that she still hasn't entirely given up and wants to find a solution, which is truly admirable considering the circumstances. However, Agnes does paint a brighter picture than reality. She goes on to say that they should try to figure out a solution to this predicament, which is overly optimistic and sort of naive, considering that Ada and her core have already died and are only temporarily alive due to the power of the Genesis. And after Melchior shows up, this spark of hope may as well have been reduced to nothing as he uses the Genesis to make Ada fight the crew against her will. After the initial boss battle, Walter shows up, because again, he's after Melchior. But this time we find out why. He says that the Oathbreaker has questions for Melchior which need answering, and later in the story we find out that the 4th Anguis, Elroy Harwood, was tasked by the Society to wipe out Almada due to the risk they pose to their plans. It's quite surprising actually. Even Ouroboros, the main antagonists of the series, are going after Almada due to the risk they pose. Up till this point, we had never seen a scenario like this one where Ouroboros has gone after another group of antagonists during the events of a Trails game. They did contribute to the extermination of the DG cult, but we only heard a few bits about that and saw brief glimpses of it from Stardor 15. If even the Society sees them as a big enough risk to warrant direct intervention, then we immediately know that this group is a legitimate threat. And dangerous as they are, as I will talk about that way later in the video. Anyways, Melchior runs off and Walter chases in pursuit of him. With no more distractions, the last boss battle ensues after another save from Mare. Once that's over, the souls of the entire squadron start ascending to the sky, since they're no longer being kept alive by the Genesis. Both Fairy and Ada's Jaeger Corps show up to pay their respects and bid farewell to the fallen warriors. Now that Ada can pass on without regrets, she makes one final request to Fairy so she can become stronger and more mature.
So much growing up to do. I want you to get strong. That's why I need you to do one last thing for me. Finish me off.
What?
Jaegers need to be prepared to take lives, and that is why it is an important ritual for them to undergo. Fairy's father and Commander Geraint of Eisenshield both order her to grant Ada her final wish. But Fairy can't do it. Before Ada's request, Fairy was in complete denial despite the clear signs that Ada's life was about to come to an end. And now faced with her request, Fairy's overwhelmed even further and can't bring herself to kill Ada. Recognizing that such a task and the circumstances surrounding it were insurmountable, especially for a kid like Fairy, Van intervenes and volunteers to deliver the final blow in her place.
This ain't a burden for a child to bear. So I'll bear it for her. It's my job to look out for my client.
Van.
He may be right.
Ida! Don't go!
You've gotta grow up. At some point. But I guess there's no need to rush. Thanks again. I'm grateful for everything you've done. Farewell, Fairy. Commander? Zeno and Leo? Fee? Yes. I'll finally be seeing you again. Rutger.
I was completely emotionally invested in the finale of this chapter, and was especially worried for Fairy. The scenario was gut-wrenching as one way or another this wouldn't have ended with a happy ending for her. Rebounding from such a terrible situation is a tall order for a 13-year-old. But luckily, she also made some great new friends during that trip who will undoubtedly help her in her personal journey from now on. This chapter is a lot shorter than the ones coming up next, and I'm glad that it wasn't padded out further, as I think its runtime is pretty good as is. Most of Chapter 2 takes place in Longport, the second biggest city in Calvard, and it's really cool. It's a strikingly modern port city with skyscrapers, which is paired together with one of the most visually striking districts in the entire series, the vibrant red Eastern Quarter. This gleaming city is also the home of Heiue, the largest mafia in Calvard, which has been teased to have a major role here ever since Trails from Zero. Earlier in the chapter, Tao recruits the Solutions Office to handle some business related to Almada and Longport. Almada recently has been stirring up trouble there, and Heiue wants to keep them in check since they have started causing issues for them and in general has sent the criminal underworld into a frenzy with their rapid ascension and influence. What I really like about Heiue's role in Calvard, as Tao states, is that it's a necessary criminal organization to keep other less principled crime syndicates, like Almada, from committing unspeakable acts, which cross the line. While Heiue is a massive criminal organization that does not always adhere to the law, it still has core principles and rules that forbid them from causing complete chaos. Anya states that you could say Heiue is just as necessary to maintain stability in Calvard as the police and Bracer Guild. It's a tiny detail, but I think it adds so much depth, especially with Almada being the antagonist at the forefront of the story who are nowhere near as merciful as Heiue. The preamble of our time in Longport mostly consists of us trying to find clues on the third Genesis, which was forcibly taken from a merchant by Almada, and why they have been causing chaos in Longport recently. This eventually causes us to run into Aaron, who has been taking care of the thugs hired by Almada these past few days, alongside his close group of friends. Aaron and his group don't appreciate outsiders, especially ones hired by Heiue, getting involved. They have a strong sense of duty to protect their city to the point of it becoming a detriment. Despite fending off the thugs, they can't maintain the stability of the city by themselves, because as we find out later, the odds were against them from the very beginning. Aaron is a smart, capable, yet stubborn and arrogant man who lets his pride get in the way of doing things for the greater good. It's clear that beating the thugs hired by Almada a few times isn't going to fix the core issue, but Aaron's group doesn't have the manpower to handle it by themselves. They need help to resolve this situation, but their dignity won't allow them to, even though they are getting frustrated at how the situation has been dragging on for a few days now. In spite of this, Aaron, out of curiosity for Van's Spriggan work, forcibly joins up with him to take on a 4SPG. Coincidentally, the request just so happened to be from one of Aaron's friends, so it ended up benefiting them both. And after taking care of business, they open up to each other a bit. Van plays a similar role here, like how he does in his dynamic with Agnes, but of course this time it's different with Aaron, who has established himself as Longport's young bright star. Yet there's been something nagging at him lately which has motivated his recent brash fights against Almada, and Van recognizes this. He acts all cool and non-confrontational, saying he has no business telling Aaron what to do, but you can tell he's trying to speak his mind on his issue, and later he even admits he sees a bit of himself in Aaron. The main dilemma plaguing Aaron's mind recently has been self-doubt. He loves Longport, his friends, and performing. However, uncertainty has been recurring constantly, bothering his psyche. In spite of his genuine affection for the city, he's recently been doubting whether he truly has been doing everything he can to protect it. Aaron hates that he feels this way, and because of it, he now feels compelled to protect Longport and prove that he truly is fond of it.
Is that so wrong? You telling me I shouldn't hate Almada for coming in and trying to mess shit up? Or be pissed at Heiue for letting it all happen? Screw all of that! I've gotta protect this place! I've I've got to prove to myself that I belong here! That all my doubts are bullshit! But if I gotta be the one to do it, you and the guild are in my way. I already know you're damn tough, and I like the way you handle your work. But I've already made up my mind. So you gonna get the hell out of here or what? What are you talking about?
But just as that moment ends, an ominous fog begins to creep up on the city, and danger is imminent. Aaron sprinted all the way back to the eastern quarter, but it was already too late. The next day, he goes missing, and the solutions office is tasked by Heiwei to find him. Eventually they do, in a warehouse owned by Almada, beating up the gang members who he thought killed his friends, though Van gives him a quick reality check.
Wake the hell up, kid! You really think these grunts masterminded what went down last night? Of course you don't! So what the hell kind of revenge is this? Use your brain for 2 seconds. What was that weird fog yesterday? And what's Almada got to do with it? Something's up here, but you gotta get to the root of the problem. Unless you do that, you'll never avenge your friends.
Right as the thugs are about to reveal what truly happened,
Still your tongue.
Don't you know what happens to snitches?
Almada are just straight up ruthless. Aaron puts 2 and 2 together and realizes that Viola and Alexander were the ones responsible for yesterday's events, and this causes him to abandon all rational thought.
Bastards that killed my friends!
It's a shame they didn't put up more of a fight.
Don't even try it! I'll freaking kill you!
Not so fast!
You're wide open.
Aaron!
As a result, he ends up badly injured, and worst of all, he wasn't able to avenge his friends. He was completely powerless against Alexandria and Viola.
It's meant you can muster. Get back here!
He realizes this and understands that he can't keep doing this on his own anymore.
I've got a job for you, Spriggan.
Aaron! You shouldn't be out of bed yet. Your wounds may reopen.
I don't have time to sit around and feel sorry for myself. Almada and Heiwei are up to some shit. And my friends are dead because of it. But I couldn't avenge them on my own. All I have to show for my efforts are some new scars. If I just teamed up with you, maybe my friends would still be alive. Those thugs in the warehouse, too. They could have atoned and made something of their lives.
Aaron.
What do I have to say to convince you? Mom loved this town so much, and so did my friends. So please, help me kick those bastards out of our town and make things right.
Oh, Aaron.
Finally dropping the pride, huh?
The Aaron from just a few days ago would have discouraged Van and his group from interfering, but now he's able to look past that and plead for their help when he needs it the most. They head off to Heilong Chengjai, a mining settlement abandoned over 40 years ago, where they find the Almada duo waiting at the end alongside the third Genesis. However, unlike last time, Aaron has steeled his resolve, not wanting to repeat the same mistakes as he did last time.
People run their mouths. I've got 1,000 reasons to smash your faces in. Revenge, keeping this city safe. But more than anything, I've got a score to settle with myself. It'd be better if I could do this alone. but I'll do whatever it takes to see this through!
Fine. Let's get to the good part early.
Bring all of your anger and resentment to bear against us.
After the battle, we find out that Eren is the reincarnation of the previous tyrant, Ragun Khan, who ruled over Longport until his death 40 years ago. To put it shortly, he was a dictator who brought fear to Longport. Heiyue assembled all of their forces just so they could seal him away in the stronghold. The third Genesis then transforms Eren into the tyrant, with Viola and Alexandre leaving as they believe that he will now destroy Longport as an act of revenge. After an exhausting battle with Grendel, the tyrant is weakened, and this gives an opportunity for Van to give Eren a very important lecture.
Mom loved this town so much, and so did my friends. So please, help me kick those bastards out of our town and make things right.
Eren Wei, listen up!
Van? Back up! He can't hear you anymore!
If you're still in there somewhere, open your damn eyes!
I am the tyrant, ruler of Longport.
It's working? Eren must have heard his words.
You ain't some tyrant! You're Eren Wei! Longport's prodigy! The little conqueror! The Eastern Quarter's favorite troublemaker! Where do you get off being a cocky runt all the damn time? And then just forgetting everything?
I must fight. Must guide. Must rule. That is my everything. My destiny.
Shut the hell up! Don't give me that destiny garbage! It's your life! Don't let some old-ass demon tell you how to live it! What happened to the guy who loves Longport with all his heart? You told me you were gonna keep it safe. Safe for everyone who loves it like you do! Did you forget? You're just gonna let some monster waltz in and trash it?
Eren! There are so many people who care about you. You mustn't forget that! Not only Ashen, Hal, Jack, and the members of Heiyue. It's everyone living in the Eastern Quarter. They're all waiting for you to come back home. It's not really my place to speak for them. But I know your friends would be calling you back too. So please, don't give up!
Letting destiny and that bastard sweep you along is the easy way out! You're just running away. What happened to proving that you belong here? I guess you just don't have what it takes. Do ya?
Seeing Eren reminded him a bit of himself, and from there on he wanted to do everything he could to help the kiddo out. We see Van remembering his past and how he ended up losing control of his life. Here he was about to witness the same thing happen to Eren, but having lived through that experience, he now knew how to reach through to him. The exchange right before the raid the night before, and the aftermath, comes full circle for Eren. Him changing his ways to reach out for help from the solutions office and facing his doubts head on now leads to this moment where he has a chance to redeem himself and save his hometown from certain destruction.
The hell is this? Am I in my own head? This must be the haze that's been hanging over me.
How dare you obstruct our destiny? Heiyue, in the time.
I can feel your pain. How bad it felt to give your all for Longport, just to get stabbed in the back. But that doesn't mean I'm about to let you destroy the place I call home. So let's settle this, one-on-one.
You will be the next tyrant. Accept your destiny and rule this land! Reckoning is upon you!
He succeeds and overcomes his inner demon. However, the victory is short-lived, turning bitter once Gian Lu appears and Van confronts him over his alliance with Halmata.
Is something the matter, Spriggan? If it concerns your compensation, my son will handle that matter in my stead.
Good to know, but actually it's something else. Say, you were in cahoots with Almata, weren't you?
What?
I was caught completely off guard by this revelation. I was way too focused on Aaron's story that I didn't even pick up on the details Van mentioned, which led him to finding out the truth. Gian's goal this whole time was to confirm whether Aaron was a reincarnation of Ragun Khan, and use him to Heyue's advantage for their upcoming trials and tribulations. The consequence for this was the raid on Longport the other day and the demise of Aaron's friends. However, Aaron has procured a lot of people who have supported him over the years, and they come to his aid at this very important time. With this, Gian's plan is halted and Longport goes back to normal with Almata pulling out of the city. As I'm sure you can tell by the runtime, I had a pleasant time reviewing this chapter. I was completely hooked on it from start to finish, and especially so with Aaron's story arc. I think this is also one of Van's best chapters as well. He really got to showcase his maturity and how far his empathy can reach other people. Longport is also a really cool setting too, with it being our first visit to a city which truly showed off Calvert's cultural diversity. I also remember that I had a cold while playing chapter 2, but it was just so good that I didn't want to stop playing even though I should have. And that sentiment hasn't changed for me at all. Even now, I wouldn't hesitate to say that this is one of my favorite chapters in the entire series. Add all of that together plus the previous 2 chapters, and I was really impressed with how the game and story was shaping up.
Perhaps we'll even run into that Spriggan again. It's almost like fate.
The ASO is going to Farbad, the entertainment city which is located in the southeast of Calvert near the border of Elsaim. They're going there due to a request from Nina Fenley, a popular actress who's participating in the new Tharbad Film Festival. She requests that the ASO provide additional security and help in figuring out who sent letters threatening that if the film festival isn't cancelled, then a tragedy will befall Tharbad. While investigating, they find the 4th Genesis on a monster, but it gets stolen by Olympia's doll Ishtanti. When Van activates Grendel, something odd happens this time around.
Oh well, the Grendels all...
There is no need to bear any nightmare, for you are already one made flesh.
Huh? What's happening?
hell's going on?
He looks like he's in real pain! Stop the process, or he's going to...
I'm not doing any of this! Wait, could it be?
I'll get to that way later, but Rosette comes in for the save. Night comes and it's time for some clowning alongside one of the best Singa tracks ever produced. Harwood and Lucrezia are also here, but nothing really comes of it, except it just serves as a brief informal introduction to them. Then, the next day, Marielle and Shahina get kidnapped by some thugs under the influence of something. Our crew later finds them in a cave where they also discover a weird plant, which is deduced to be one that is specifically used to make some bad drugs. After a bit of information exchange, it is eventually found out that Vegas Films, more specifically its CEO, Gaspar Dillon, distributed the threatening letters while also working together with Almada. This time, Sarah gets kidnapped and Dillon becomes the primary suspect. They follow him down into a basement under the building of Vegas Films where they find clear-cut proof that someone was manufacturing drugs down there. Despite him being obviously involved, Dillon tries to place all the fault onto Almada, while pretending he was a victim all along. He explains that he sent those letters so the people who received them would be discouraged from coming to Tharbad, though those words don't hold much weight for long as he releases a mechanical monster into the fray and escapes while mocking our group. As the ASO is about to defeat the mech, Dillon is stopped by Melchior, and also Almada's leader, Gerard Dantes.
What do you think?
He performed his role well. I will commend him for that. Rest assured, dear Dillon, that we will make this a festival to remember. It's time we served you as the opening act. Now, let us see your fear.
No, 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 no!
The music stopping there is horrifying, and we are brutally reminded of Almada's reputation as a merciless mafia. To go along with his corpse, Melchior even wrote a funny little message with Dillon's blood. How nice of him. Things get sorted out and everyone is getting ready to go to sleep, but that's when this happens.
Why, hello. Lovely night we're having, isn't it?
Festival day arrives and all is well, until it isn't, because Shahina suddenly gets the urge to put on a mask. Yep, we're doing this again. Under the influence of the fourth Genesis and extra motivation from Dantes, Shahina puts on a mask similar to those we have seen previously, which take advantage of the vulnerabilities in people's hearts to make them act against their will. With her dance as the catalyst, people who recently smoked Almada's manufactured drugs are affected and start doing weird stuff, ranging from violence to being high. So then Van remembers that there was a similar incident in Crossbell not too long ago, so they got Sarah to do the exact same thing that resolved that situation. While the two sisters are in a hardcore 1v1, the Solutions office goes to the hotel to retrieve the Genesis, which is in the hands of Almada's leader, thus marking our first formal meeting with him outside of some teasers throughout the chapter.
My name is Gerard Dantes, the head of Almada. So you are the Spriggan. Somehow, this doesn't quite feel like our first encounter.
Fate notwithstanding, you are correct. This isn't even our first time meeting in this city.
What?
You don't mean... He was that guy in the casino?
Besides that, he also lets us know that it's in the Genesis' nature to eventually come back into the hands of its rightful owner, while also hinting at the fact that there are many more aspects of these devices' nature that we, and Gerard himself, don't know about yet.
What?
Sounds like you have a lot of info you could share with us.
Perhaps. Yet only a fraction of all there is to know.
Anyways, Najee and Sharid also had some of the drugs, so now we have to fight them, and eventually this leads to the crew retrieving the fourth, Sarah and Shahina's dance-off coming to an end, and Almada flying off on their very own airship. So I know I was narrating this as if I didn't really care, but Yeah, that's exactly the case. In my eyes, it's an average chapter at best and bad at worst. The sharp decline in quality really took a toll on my investment while playing this one for the first time, especially after the highs of the previous 3. It was actually like the first time while making the script that I had a hard time actually writing anything because of how unimpressive the whole chapter was. Sarah and Shaheen were kind of the main focus here, and it wasn't bad, but also just not notable in any particular aspect. Not to mention that it's way too similar to a storyline we just had in the game right before this one. I also couldn't really take all the dancing stuff seriously. It looks cheap and lame, and there's also some other annoying cliches in this chapter like girls getting constantly kidnapped, and the Grimcat's identity joke getting old really fast. The new arrival this time, Rosette, didn't have much of a plotline in this chapter, though at least we get a bit of that next time. We also got a bunch of information and new characters introduced to us for the first time, like Shahina, Sarah, Rosette, Prince Sharid, Najee, Nina, Director Gotti, Harwood, Lucrezia, and Olympia. And to be honest, I don't care, nor was I able to get invested into about 70% of these characters even after 3 games of this arc. Especially these 4. I'm honestly so exhausted of them showing up every game only to end up doing nothing again, nor giving me a reason to care about them. However, by far the most important out of all of these characters was Dante's, the best thing about this chapter. He makes a very good first impression with his calm but deadly demeanor, and left me wanting to know more on what he plans to do next with Almada.
Not so fast! Tell me one thing. Just how far do you plan on taking this madness?
Come now, Spriggan. You know the answer as well as I do. There are no limits to the lengths we will go.
Okay, so I thought it would be the most fitting to put the gameplay section after chapter, because by this point in the game, we've got a pretty good taste of pretty much every aspect of the gameplay and changes from Reverie to Daybreak. First of all, I want to talk about the combat. I played on hard mode all the way up until the start of chapter 5, where I realized that the game was way too easy for me. I don't think it would be controversial to say that this is by far one of the easiest Trails games combat-wise, mayhaps even the easiest. Let's start with the obvious new addition, action combat. I think a good way to coin it is to call it a tech demo in this state, and you will know what I mean if you have already played Horizon. Action combat is very basic in this game. The purpose is to stun enemies so you gain an advantage once you enter command mode. Basic attacks, heavy attacks, any dodge is what you are given. It's extremely simple, which doesn't necessarily mean bad. In fact, it can be quite fun if you take into account the perfect dodge mechanic, which fully fills your charge for a heavy attack after dodging an incoming enemy attack. Obviously this isn't Souls or anything, but it still creates tension when you have to time the dodge, and I find that enjoyable. Even with this feature, action combat is very repetitive due to the lack of variety, plus ideally you do want to start with your main DPS at the start of the battle, so you don't have to wait for their turn once you enter command mode. And because of that, the supports won't be doing much in regular counters if your main DPS is built very well. The option is there to just mash attacks until the enemies are killed, but this method is very tedious because it takes a very long time and you probably aren't going to take this route about, I don't know, 97% of the time if you're playing on hard mode for the action combat. The thing that mitigates combat from becoming stale is of course command mode. It is very familiar and operates mostly the same as we have come to know it, except for a few changes. You can now move without using up a turn, the new S-boost system, which is also now tied to activating S-crafts and unique buffs from your holocore. Different holocores will raise certain attributes depending on which one you have equipped, but their main function is to provide big stat increases when boosting in combat, and each one has different stats that grow after boosting. On top of that, it also increases your chances or sometimes outright guarantees passive effect activation. For example, Judgment Feather by default has a 40% chance of proccing, but when boosting once, it's raised to 90%, and if twice, then 100%. S-boost is very important and will need to be managed very carefully if you seek to play optimally. If not, then you can just use it on Van and not think much about it. Without boosting 2 times, party members also can't use their S-crafts, which means they have been restricted to be less available. However, in a game where there's only a few main DPS candidates, most of the time your boost will just go to them, or in certain battles where Grendel is available, all your boost will go to him, so he can use more abilities. While this system does pose a restriction on other party members to use their ultimates, it's also a boon that is incredibly broken. Spamming S-crafts with Van is the go-to strategy for Nightmare. If you abuse the craft point generation strategy of just casting Chain of Flame with Fairy, putting burst gain, and all craft point generation accessories, you can just spam like 3 S-crafts in a row with Van after boosting, while he also receives massive damage increase buffs from his hollow core. And I'm putting a lot of emphasis on Van specifically because he is by far the best party member in this game. He's available right from the beginning, he's one of the only frontline characters available in the first 40 hours, his crafts are really good for buffing and dealing a ton of damage, and also Coin Bullet makes him the ultimate tank. Agnes, who is the strongest arts caster in the game, has an S-craft which revives and heals all allies, which is useful for very specific scenarios, but it makes it very hard to actually invest boost into her. In this game, casters overall have very weak S-crafts in my opinion, so it was hard to justify enhancing them instead of Van. Remember, boost isn't just a gatekeeper to S-crafts, but also stat increases from hollow cores, so it's very important to have a good S-craft, otherwise by default it goes to Van and maybe a sub-DPS like Aaron or Brigard. It is kind of fitting that as the leader in the plot, Van is the strongest character in the game, to the point where removing him from the party is just self-sabotage, but it also takes away so much attention from the other party members, which again is kind of how the story is actually. Boost increases stats by a lot, so if it's not being used on a certain character, then their full potential won't be drawn out. The main problem with balancing in this game is that the benefit of just boosting the main DPS all the time outweighs any other option so heavily that using it on other party members is often going to feel wasteful. I do like this dynamic when Grendel is used in battles, as it needs to feel powerful and to be the main focus. However, if you weren't enhancing Van earlier, then you sure will be now, since boosting allows Grendel to use more abilities in a single turn, thus pulling all of it to him if you want to play optimally and get the biggest reward for your boost investment. Sure, you could invest into a Agnes or Judith main DPS caster build, or a main DPS Aaron or Brigard composition, but why bother when Van is so much better and has Grendel, which will need all the boost you have, thus gutting the other DPS characters entirely. All in all, to me, the boost system presents a very bothersome dilemma where its investment is usually solely focused on one person, hence why I barely saw any other characters as crafts. I rambled for a long time, but what do I think of the combat overall? Well, I enjoyed it a lot, especially early in the game, when I was incredibly motivated to do battles with all the new overhauls, but also because I wanted to hear Open the Shard, because it slaps. I like the new ideas presented, like chain effects and moving freely. However, since we are talking about a series that has multiple games in the same arc, where they can range around from 60 to 80 hours, the combat clearly needed to grow further, add more variety and party member options to avoid stagnation in later games. Well, it's about time I move on from the combat to blitz through some other aspects of the gameplay. In an interview on the 28th of November in 2020, Toshihiro Kondo, president of Falcom, talked about the company's main goals with the soft reboot. From reading the gameplay section of the interview and playing the game itself, it's not hard to see that a big focus of this new arc was to make everything faster and more efficient. The battle system of the series so far can be seen as completely command-based, and it was a weak point for it hurt the tempo of the games. We've been thinking about what we should do with these parts, and the new battle system is the result of our thorough investigation and reassembling. He's specifically only talking about the combat here, but it's pretty clear that they carried this approach to many core elements of the gameplay. Without a doubt, the change that impacted the tempo the most was seamless transitions. In the previous games, you had to wait for the enemies to dissipate, then load into the results screen, then press the X button a bunch of times rapidly to get out of the results screen and load back into the field. This was completely reworked. In Daybreak you win, and you don't have to wait for the enemies to explode or whatever, you are immediately back in control, with the results screen showing up on the side of the screen instead. Combat animations essentially all across the board are way faster now. As an example, I will use casting. I chose casting because in Reverie and previous titles, there's always been this awkward pause after a character starts charging up their cast, so a magical sound effect or a voice line can play for like a second and a half or more. This is also no longer a thing in Daybreak, and the animation for an art cast startup is way faster and efficient. Like I mentioned earlier, this basically applies to most if not all animations in the game. Seamless transitions not only had a major impact for combat, but also for reducing the amount of loading screens when going through a town. Gone are the days of having to wait for the game to load in a tiny shop or building. There are probably a few more things I miss, but even then, these changes alone were able to make the game feel a whole lot faster than the previous ones. Craft and arts animations have received a massive upgrade. The movements are more lifelike and don't look completely robotic and unnatural anymore. It's also great to see that in the newer games, the animations keep getting even better. The alignment system is very cool in concept, but it's also tricky. Daybreak 1 is the only game so far that has actually utilized this system to the point where it actually affects the story, even if just a little bit. The idea to implement the alignment system into the main story was ambitious and very cool in concept. The best moment of it was getting to choose which party to team up with in Chapter 5. Be that as it may, I think the reason why nothing like this ever happened again in Daybreak 2 and Horizon is because it is very limiting for the writers to have all of these potential different outcomes and diversions. Not to mention that each game is like 80 plus hours now, so those scripts are already massive. That being said, I still like the system even when just used in side quests. Even if it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, I still like that I have a say in what decisions should be made, when there isn't one definitive correct decision for the characters to make. Falcom's new engine was a big deal for this game, as it was the first one to fully use it from start to finish. Now, I am a big noob when it comes to graphics and all that, so I will keep this simple. However, another thing I have to say is that I played the official English version on PC. As I mentioned earlier in this video, I played Daybreak 2 and Horizon with a fan patch, which meant I had to play on the Clouded Leopard Entertainment PC ports. And the differences between the two are noticeable right off the bat, as the CLE one just looks worse graphically in pretty much every aspect as far as I can tell. Props to Durante and anyone else working on the localized ports. Not to mention the fact that they recently updated Daybreak 1 seemingly out of nowhere. On the surface, Daybreak 1 visually looks great, and the art direction is noticeably more mature than Cold Steel's vibrant colors. Another thing that benefited from the new engine is animations. Ever since Cold Steel 1, this was one of my biggest gripes with the 3D era of Trails, because many scenes were plagued by slow and cheap looking animations. Ordinarily, I wouldn't really care about this sort of thing, but I always hated it when it would suck the tension out of scenes or make things look extremely awkward in certain scenarios. The example that always comes back to my mind is the scene in Reverie where Claire is shooting at Yuna and Altina. They run for cover under the bridge, but the run is so goddamn slow that it just makes the whole sequence look hilarious, even though it's very serious in plot. The same complaints apply to everything else after that comical jog under the bridge. Everything is so sluggish and it makes the battle look like child's play. Thankfully for me though, from Daybreak onwards, the running animation is way faster and doesn't look like this anymore. Another aspect that makes battles feel less tenseful is when dialogue freezes the battle. This is something that will likely never be changed, except for when a fully rendered cutscene is playing. If you have played Daybreak 2, you will know what cutscene I am talking about, which plays in Act 2A. That cutscene is a great example which proves that Falcom can actually make fight scenes look hype as hell, and not look like the characters are stopping time when they decide to speak. And if you've played Horizon, you will know that its fully rendered cutscenes are cranked up to 11, making every battle it's used in feel significantly more intense and meaningful. My whole point is that making action scenes look good and not goofy as fuck is very important. If a very serious scene is playing and this is how the battle looks, I can't take it seriously. However, if it looks like that cutscene in Act 2A of Daybreak 2, then I definitely can. In conclusion, I'm very happy and thankful that Trails' combat scenes and animations have received a lot more care with this new engine, because I don't want to go back to that horror ever again. If you have been around in Trails community circles or lurked around like I have for a decent amount of time, you and likely many other people will already know what the common perception is of this game's soundtrack. That ever since Cold Steel 4, Trails soundtracks have been on a downward trajectory from amazing to pretty good, but not as amazing as it once was. Daybreak and other post-2019 Falcom titles have a very unique situation when it comes to their soundtracks when compared to most other modern JRPGs. Individually, there are amazing tracks. What Is Ahead of You, Cloudy Cloudy, Arkwright Solutions Office, Tharp Bad Night, Hard Desperation, Unmitigated Evil, Resonance of Ray, Captive Soul, In the Dawn, Curl Beyond the Dawn, and more. On the other hand, there is an obvious disconnect when it comes to modern Falcom soundtracks, which creates a rift that makes it feel like the soundtracks aren't even compiled under the same vision or direction in mind, which is pretty much exactly what is going on. If you didn't know, almost half of Daybreak 1's soundtrack is outsourced. In the case of modern Falcom, most of the outsourced work is done by two composers, Yukihiro Jindo and Mitsuo Senga. Jindo has been composing for Falcom as a freelancer ever since 2003. Despite never actually joining Falcom as an official employee, his compositions and arrangements are held in very high regard across every single Falcom title he has worked on. Go to any Jindo composed track on YouTube and you will likely see nothing but praise for his work. And there's no doubt that he has composed at least a few of your favorite pieces from Trails, Ys, or even Falcom's more niche IPs. It's to the point where it's actually quite baffling how he does his job so exceptionally well. Why, you might ask? Because contractors don't even receive full in-game context for what they are composing. As opposed to internal composers who are in the know and can collaborate with other Falcom employees, contracted ones like Jindo only receive generic and short descriptions on what type of track Falcom wants them to make. They don't know how their music will be used, nor do they even get access to the games while they are in development. Despite these circumstances, Jindo still manages to create music that seamlessly fits into a complete soundtrack, as if he were an internal composer, though his tracks per game are limited to a fraction, usually at around 10 to 15%. But if you remember what I said earlier, about half of Daybreak 1's music is outsourced, which means that the remaining 35 to 40% has to be filled by the second contracted composer working for Falcom, Mitsuo Singa. Singa's rate of production ever since Trails into Reverie in 2020 has skyrocketed, and now he has the most contributions to every single post-2019 Trails soundtrack. And to put it shortly, the reception from fans has been mixed. Because of his incredibly low rates and efficiency to put out tracks extremely quickly, Singa's music is very inconsistent in quality, ranging from bad to alright to great. Regardless of the many plausible reasons for his inconsistency, I don't think Singa is the one most at fault for the current situation. The reality is that he is just another cog in the machine known as modern Falcom music. In an effort to cut costs and to put less load on their few remaining internal composers, Falcom, more specifically his higher-ups or whoever is in charge of their music sector, is likely content with hiring Singa for cheap so he can quickly pump out serviceable music for these reasons. I could go into more detail, but I'll stop here. There's a whole lot of information regarding the rabbit hole that is Falcom's music history that would take a lot of time to cover. Though in a nutshell, Falcom's management of its music department is not pretty, and is tainted with numerous incidents and controversies. Anyways, to spin this back to Daybreak, it's not hard to imagine that with the conditions put onto their contracted composers, and with the amount they have to produce, that there's simply no possible way that a whole soundtrack will be composed under a single cohesive direction. Recurring themes representing a certain idea or leitmotifs reinforcing a narrative point are for the most part not an option anymore with this new direction of having a ton of outsourced music. In Jindo's case, sometimes the music he made for a specific game got used for a different one, and sometimes even for a game in a completely different series. Songwriting is just as crucial as making songs sound pleasing. The leitmotif that represents the Cold Steel saga is a great example of this. This leitmotif started all the way back in Sky the Third with the track The Final Choice, and was consistently used throughout the Erebonia arc to create a recurring theme for Cold Steel. There is a very good video on YouTube called Trails of Cold Steel Leitmotif, which compiles most, if not every song that has this leitmotif, and the result is just excellent. It really is awe-inspiring when you listen to all of them back to back. When I think of Erebonia, this jingle is what I remember. You simply can't beat the combination of good songwriting and composition. As for Calvard, at first I think all of us did assume that the motif for Calvard would be What Is Ahead of You or something similar to it, since it was used at the end of Forward Sword in Hand. What Is Ahead of You itself is a recurring track in this game, but it was not further built on, nor were there any other motifs present in the entire soundtrack. As I said, there are exceptional individual tracks. I even have more than half of the soundtrack downloaded to my phone, but this issue became more and more apparent as I played through Daybreak 2 and Horizon, when I realized that unfortunately for Calvard, there essentially isn't a motif or recurring theme neatly stringing all the games together, unlike every single previous arc. The Calvard arc's music as a whole lacks definitive structure, however that still doesn't mean the composers weren't able to create some amazing hits. I mentioned earlier that the first 20 hours of Daybreak 1 to me were absolutely magical. One of the main components to this was the music used in the prologue, which was fantastic and is the reason why I highlighted the music in that chapter so much. Since it didn't feature as much outsourced music as the subsequent chapters, the internal composers Koguchi and Sonoda were able to create a cohesive narrative with their music that got me hooked on the story right from the get-go. Jindo's endgame tracks were also supreme as always, as they felt like they represented the scenario or emotional weight of the story seamlessly. Regardless of the situation, there still are talented and passionate composers on board who will put their best efforts into the music of these games. But, long story short, this is the reason why the perception of Falcom soundtracks has gone down. On the flip side, if you enjoy the music and don't have many complaints or not at all, that is also completely fine. And most of all, I wonder how Falcom will handle their music in the not-so-distant future, because I can't imagine this model will be sustainable for long. Though we will just have to find out whether that happens, or if it will continue to be present for many years to come. This time it's off to Basel, the engineering city, which is obviously reminiscent of Zeiss from Liberl, and especially so in its similar theme. The ASO is assigned by the CID and Prince Cherie to investigate the suspicious activities of the Verne Company, and its CEO, Bill Townsend. There they meet Katra, a young scientist currently conducting research at the Institute of Science in Basel. He also has ties to one of Epstein's 3 disciples, LaToya Hamilton. She took him in at a young age, and Katra ended up being inspired by Hamilton's work with orbital technology, thus wanting to become a scientist. After the Solutions Office does some investigating, they end up meeting with David Callahan, because they received an anonymous request to look into his alleged abusive work environment. And while he doesn't do a very good job of hiding it, and is way too enamored with the recent project, which he claims will shift the power balance of Zemuria entirely. Later that same day, he goes missing, after giving Katra an eerie call. The following day, it's found out that Callahan had accepted an investment for his research from Almada. After talking to Cronkite, we find out that he was looking to develop nuclear weapons for the Calvardian military. With this knowledge in mind, they head out to an outdoor complex, where they confirm the information and find Callahan's drowned body. And immediately right after that, Basel gets raided by Almada's archaisms. The pressure from the discovery of Callahan's body to Basel suddenly being invaded was thrilling. After arriving at the observatory and fighting Melchior and Olympia, plus their auras. Unfortunately for Katra, Melchior had already planted many explosives to destroy the Aurora. And then this happens.
Get back here!
I won't let it happen. I won't let anyone damage the place she holds so dear!
This was so shocking to me and legitimately had me questioning whether a main cast character had died, though we find out only Rosette would have been able to survive the explosion from that distance. Katra and Rosette's interaction the next day is another one of my favorite character moments in the game.
Why? Why did you risk your life to save mine? No one should have to put themselves through something like this over someone like me.
It was because you were just so dazzlingly radiant in that moment, I suppose.
What?
Up till this point, we didn't have much of an impression of Rosette, other than she's a capable concierge who is incredibly formal, mature, and efficient. For probably most of us, she gave off this impression that she had all of her responsibilities sorted and was living the good life. So it was quite shocking to find out that in contrast to that, she actually has so little to the point where she doesn't even own the body she is using.
You have so many people who care about you, and you care about them just as much in return. To someone who's lost her bonds, memories, and even body, the sight was almost blinding. I'm a little jealous of all you have, if I'm to tell the truth. So please, treat yourself like an irreplaceable treasure, not just for you, but for those who love you too.
Her speech to Katra is just as captivating, and makes him realize how oblivious he had been to his surroundings this whole time. During the chapter, we saw multiple glimpses of how Katra harbors deep self-doubt and low confidence. But once again, like with Aaron, Van gives him the final push.
I want to stop Professor Callahan and the devils who've done this to him by my own hand. No matter what it takes.
Oh, Katra.
Sorry, but no can do.
I suppose that's the right decision after I landed Rosette in a hospital bed. I wasn't able to use Fio and Zeros at even half of their potential, either. If all I'm gonna be is a burden to the team...
That ain't what I'm saying. You're no burden. We're gonna need you and your engineering know-how here for sure. But we're also not a charity. We only do favors for people if the client and price are a good fit. You heard what Reset said, right? If you did, then you should know what you gotta do. And where you went wrong.
You're right. I should never have done something that would upset the people who care about me. And I never will again. I just want to stop the chaos unfolding in Basel and the misuse of technology that created it. And if I'm gonna do that, it's not the help of the police or guild I need. It's you. As compensation, I can offer you my skills and expertise on technology. I can also give you my word that I'll help Essie put Reset back to the way she was as fast as possible. Is that enough to make me a good fit for you?
It sure is. We'd be happy to take that 4 SPG on. We'll be counting on you now. Couldn't ask for better than a student of Professor Hamilton's.
Eventually, they make it to another Aurora terminal in an abandoned factory, where Melchior, Olympia, and AI Callahan are waiting. After a series of boss battles, Van removes the 5th Genesis from the assault frame, which puts a stop to the Professor's plans. With the Genesis no longer granting power to the terminal, David's AI will no longer be able to operate. Even as an AI, he realizes his mistakes, and offers his formulae to the researchers at Basel so his work was not completely in vain. To me, Chapter 4 was a rather inoffensive episode, especially compared to the previous one, which I found to be overly goofy and hard to care for at times. While it was competent with the highlights being Almada and Catra and Reset's dynamic, I felt like the story was starting to lose its momentum by not ramping things up. And because of that, it made this chapter essentially feel like an exact repeat of chapters 2 and 3 for the 3rd time in a row. Yeah, I know it's ironic that I'm complaining about the story being formulaic since I am talking about the Trails series, but after the promise I saw from the prologue in chapters 1 and 2, I kind of was hoping that this wouldn't be the status quo anymore, so I suppose I was a tad bit disappointed when it turned out that it still was. Anyways, my point being that I felt that right about now, the story should have started picking up the momentum a lot more. But then, I find out that actually we're going to have an intermission and go on a vacation. I'll resume shortly after this quick break.
You served me well in Basel. We could have had quite the crisis on our hands if events had been allowed to play out as our foes wanted.
Thank you, sir. Though I believe most of the credit goes to our agent in the field and the Principality's representatives. I will admit that I did not anticipate you hiring Marduk to act when they did, however.
They will do whatever you ask so long as the price is right. It makes them rather convenient in times like these. There are advantages to their being a neutral organization beholden to no government, even if using their services requires an objective mindset. I imagine you can see their merits as well, Professor Cronkite.
I do. At least they are competent, unlike a certain superior of mine that I could name.
I don't disagree. The time is long past due for Vern to appoint a new CEO. We can maintain the status quo as long as Professor Hamilton remains in the Republic. But as soon as she departs, we will indeed make the necessary arrangements.
I see no issue with that timeline.
Now, as we previously agreed, I think it's about time you got to work. After all, this project will bring about massive change to the Republic, for the entire world. Nothing will be the same after the Republican Army's Zeku space base is completed and in operation.
The ASO and Yume take a vacation to Longlai, an eastern city with a more subtle and relaxing feel than Longport's eastern quarter. It's evidently more focused on a tranquil atmosphere, coupled with a calming theme which I found to be an incredibly soothing combo. Also, have you noticed yet that I really like one-on-one character interactions in this game? Well, here's another one. Two dudes soaking in a hot spring, and it's one of the most peak moments in the game, in my opinion. Up till this point, details about Van's past have steadily been accumulating, but we haven't had a major breakthrough yet, which not only is one of the biggest questions on our minds at this point in the story, but also for the characters. And with curiosity mounting, Aaron decides to start breaking the ice even further, as he gives a very perceptive description of Van's character and personality.
Man, I've seen them all in the sauna before. But you sure got hella scars, huh? Bet they come with a ton of shady stories to tell.
Not gonna deny it. That's just how it is when you're in this business.
I'll bet. Especially when you've got connections with PMCs, the Society, AUA, and a bunch of other dicey groups. Sounds like you backed up the Mirage side during the war a couple years ago, too. Then your ex is an A-rank bracer, and you've got a partner in crime in the CID. A ton might even be selling it short.
Keep it up with the wild guesses. Too sharp for his own good.
So, you went to high school with those two, right?
Give me a break here. Your intuition is something else, you brat.
Doesn't need to be something else in this case. The small fry might not have noticed, but Miss Perfect sure has. You're just so easy to read. It's like you're not even trying to hide this stuff.
I really like this scene because of Aaron's perception. He even mentions that the others have got him figured out just like him. Before this dialogue, we get Fairy and Agnes's opinions on Van, which match with what Aaron said. Aaron was the perfect candidate for this scene. He's not the type to beat around the bush, and because of this, he is the only one who at this stage of the story could be this straightforward to Van, to call him out on his act, how he throws himself in danger for them, and in the end he makes a remark which even shakes Van, likely because it hit real close to the truth.
Cutting right to the chase, huh? I mean, you're right. It's not like I'm going out of my way to hide it, but...
You just never volunteered either. Same difference. Almost bizarre how you hold your cards close to your chest while using your whole Spriggan deal to meddle in others' affairs. How you always dive head first to protect us from danger, whatever the cost to yourself. Like you aren't worth a damn.
Putting it like that's a little...
You try to disguise it. You get real pushy when it comes to Mira and make a show of boiling everything down to debts paid or owed. But it's all talk, isn't it? At least when it comes to us. You're all give and no take. And I hate how you're making me leave my debt to you forever unpaid. I get it, though. You're scared, aren't you?
I see this as a reward to the player for caring about the characters and paying close attention, as I don't think this scene would have had nearly as much weight if we didn't have a significant amount of interest in Van as a character. We also knew before coming here that Van has some history in Long Lie, which further sparked curiosity as to what would be revealed about him this time. Because of that, I was unimaginably invested into this exchange, though unfortunately for us, Van acknowledges that Aaron's examination of him is for the most part spot on, but he doesn't open up any further. As for the girls, they also have a nice moment together as Rosette opens up a bit more to Agnes and Fairy. I like this simply because it made the party feel a lot closer after this section than before. Later, Yume goes missing, and we find out that Mare possessed her body and ran away to go look for something in the Kunlun Mountains.
This is my first time getting to experience the real world. What's wrong with me having a little fun? I bet that maid over there understands how I'm feeling better than the rest of you. Boy, this is tons more fun than I thought it'd be. That economic activity called shopping was fun too, even if it was a bit, primitive. Dining to sustain your vital functions is probably my favorite part so far, though. Still, I guess I should probably give this body back and go back to how things were before. Oh, but before that, I was really curious about that thing.
Though her plan is thwarted as Shizune is in charge of restricting further access ahead. After that kerfuffle, Mare gives us one last tease.
It really does seem like she used the resonance phenomenon in some way.
But considering she was able to operate Yume's body remotely, she must be using orbal waves. Or septium veins, even.
Oh, one last thing before you go. We get that you wanted to try a bunch of different things. But why'd you come all the way up here?
Oh, right. It's because further up the mountains I sensed that might be something to keep in mind going forward. Maybe after the activation of...
Now, it's time for one of the biggest moments of the game. Throughout the story, Armada has been wreaking havoc all over the country, but it was always apparent that they were holding back in pursuit of a larger goal. Every time they succeeded in their experiments, the more tensions rose in anticipation of what they would do next, and whether they would take it even further than before, which eventually led to this moment.
Our moment is at hand, my fellow countrymen. We shall vanquish the knights and the noblemen, trample the enemy underfoot, and stain the palace floors with their blood.
Fancy seeing you here. I never thought I'd find you casually whistling La Raciones.
It's been some time since we last met, Dingo Brad. Though we did cross paths in Tharbad, albeit briefly. If we exclude that little encounter, I haven't seen you since your days as a mere informant in Messeldom.
Yeah, and you were still Enrique's second in command back then. I caught wind of your arrival here. I thought the idea was ludicrous at the time, and yet there you stand. So answer me this. What's your game here, Gerard Dantes?
You're a persistent one, I'll give you that. You've been following our trail for a long time now. And lo and behold, your dogged pursuit has finally borne fruit. Congratulations. I shall bestow upon you a reward. One far greater than any Pulitzer.
Let me guess. The sweet release of death, huh?
Well, yes. It truly is a pity. I do sincerely respect your investigative prowess. However, before you meet your demise, I will offer you a glimpse of the end of time.
Is that thing made of shards?
Correct. This is the artifact that Basel professor fell just short of completing. Or rather, this is a substitute for it.
Wait.
It's called an explosive lens, or so I hear. Alas, the professor met an untimely end before he could finalize a formula for the most efficient structure. Though this shard-based replica will suffice, and I can detonate it with my sword. Its destructive capabilities are beyond compare. This little village will be history.
Are you insane? You'll get caught up in the blast too!
Ah, but I have an ace up my sleeve. Teleportation. Still, I'd place my odds of survival at 30%. But the thrill of the gamble is irresistible.
Wait! There are children here. Not even Adios could forgive such a heinous act. Please give these people time to evacuate. I'm begging you.
I'm afraid doing that would defeat the entire point of this experiment. Every living creature is equal in the face of true fear. Demonstrating that is my life's purpose. How fortunate that your camera can now connect to a Zypha, though it will not save you. So why not drop it and fight to the bitter end?
Because I know I can't stop you. But thanks to this, I can pass the torch to those who will. Burn in the pits of Gehenna! Gerard Dantes!
Such bravado. Now take your final shots and die!
Mario.
Except even this wasn't the final objective, but yet another experiment for their ultimate goal. But also more specifically, a provocation. A dare to all significant parties in Calvert to challenge and hunt them down. Exterminating an innocent and peaceful village that was well liked by just about any Calvardian would lead anyone with a bare minimum moral code to want to put Almada down. Hence the reason why this location was picked by Melchior. Besides the significance of this turning point in the plot, this event is just straight up brutal. Almost everyone you met, except a few who were not in the village at the time of the explosion, are all dead. Even those who weren't there during that time aren't as lucky either, especially for Lashkar, a young kid who now has to accept that everyone he knew there and the place he grew up in are now gone forever. It would take a miracle for anyone to recover from something as traumatic as that. This tragedy is similar to, or debatably even more devastating than that of the Hamel tragedy, an event etched deep into the series' history. Unlike Hamel, which was forgotten, Cray will be remembered, and many will know the partial truth behind the circumstances that led to its destruction. The significance of the nuking of Cray was undeniably staggering and emotional. It was a bold decision by Falcom, and it upheld Daybreak's darker tone. But I have a few gripes, especially on the timing and execution of this entire sequence of events. I can't help but feel that if we hadn't heard about Cray's destruction and Dingo's death before the actual cutscene itself, it would have been significantly more impactful. Let me set the stage for you here. We keep the calm before the storm. Edith's traffic is in disarray, the Orbital network is restricted for an unknown reason, and the news broadcast is unable to proceed as usual with some very odd hiccups. The Solutions office returns to Montmartre, where a tense atmosphere hangs over the entire bistro as they await a radio announcement that could either confirm or dispel some horrifying rumors they heard. Everything about this moment screams that something of unbelievable magnitude has just occurred. Kincaid begins his radio announcement, and then the screen fades to black and we cut to Cray. Personally, I think the gradual crescendo would have worked way better than playing this scene immediately after telling us what had happened. Not to mention the incredibly goofy track that plays, which honestly sounds more funny than sad, especially once you get to the part with the violin. It just sounds like something someone would play to make fun of you. Though unfortunately this is just a consequence of OST mismanagement yet again. Despite these gripes, this still is one of the most impactful moments in the game, and a sign that we are now entering the endgame. I complained earlier during Chapter 4 that I felt that the story should have started to ramp up already at that point, and it seems like my wishes were finally answered now, even if it was about 15 hours later than I would have liked. Regardless, this was what I was looking for after that long drought, and with it, for me, Chapter 5 was shaping up to be one of the best in the series if they could land the execution of the story, and also cement Almada as one of the best antagonist factions we have ever had in Trails, with their very impressive run so far. After my strong initial impression of the story at first, I was sincerely hoping that Chapter 5 could hook me back in. The next day, the ASO watches the video Dingo recorded right before his death, and head out in search of information on Almada's whereabouts. Eventually, this leads to Burgard showing up in the Black Light District, and we find out he's the former 8th Dominion. Back at the office, he reveals to the ASO that many organizations were recently made aware of Almada's current location, and that their goal is to bring every single one of them into one place. He also makes his intentions clear, stating that he wants to help Van's group.
Supporting the youths whose futures are so bright. And also, to keep them safe from venomous fiends, like these unwanted guests of yours.
That's so. What a shame. And after we came all this way to give you a job, and a little souvenir from your reporter friend. Knew that'd reel you in. Thanks, bud.
Do excuse us.
I love the tension here. It reminds me of our first encounter with Walter back in Cray, though here it's amped up even further because of the topic of discussion and because Harwood is pretty intimidating. He commands the room like he owns the place, and his presence demands our attention because everything about him screams danger. He's here to give a job to the solutions office, and naturally he receives quite a bit of pushback. Like I mentioned back in chapter 1, Harwood is in charge on behalf of Ouroboros to kill everyone in Almada, and now he wants Van and crew to also be there. He states that the reason he wants them specifically to join in is because if they don't, there will be an imbalance of parties who wish to uphold justice as opposed to those more aligned with chaos and the underworld. At first I genuinely thought that there was an ulterior motive to his request, and maybe there still is, but the way this guy approaches life made me realize that he would totally request the solutions office to participate solely for this reason. To add to this, we find out that Harwood and Lucrece used to be part of the Order of the Moonlight Horse, and after the DG cult was also nearly wiped out, Harwood merged the remnants of the Order and the cult into the Gardens, who are now working with Almada. So yeah, Harwood is one of the main reasons we even got to this situation in the first place. You gotta love just how easily despicable he is. Before departing, he also gives our crew a gift. The following day, the Solutions Office and many other groups arrive at Arasion, the former royal capital where the upcoming carnival is taking place. I love the idea of this game. Organizations new and familiar all gathered into one place, forced to do battle with each other, unless they wish to set off a nuclear bomb, of course. Not only that, you can also choose to align with 4 out of the 20 parties participating: the Bracer Guild, Heiyue, Ikaruga, and Ouroboros. I'd like to think that the Ouroboros route is the canonical one personally, also because they were the ones that gave us the job in the first place. However, I can't honestly say that the execution didn't disappoint me. We were given a few teasers by members of Almada right before chapter 5. The impression their teasers gave me was that this was going to be a ruthless game where battle was going to mean life or death. I mean, their promises of blood and violence surely seemed like that was how it was going to go. Except the way to defeat groups in the carnival filled with blood and violence is to grab key cards off the opponents. So naturally, I question where's the blood and violence? Obviously, I know Falcom wouldn't commit to killing major characters, but I think the potential for some storylines here would have been amazing. Emotional scenes and all, where characters have to contemplate whether the ends would justify the means if it came to having to execute someone, which we sort of get, but not in the way I was looking for. The only time where Almada delivers on their promises is when they offer up their own members individually as sacrifices, and then we get the choice whether to murder them or not. I found this all very confusing and still do, to be honest. This made them look incredibly lame to me in contrast to how much of a threat they were up until now. It just isn't in Almada's nature to be this merciful. Even killing their own members is optional, and this is the main reason why I felt so underwhelmed once we finally won the prize of fighting Dantes. After beating Viola, the first Guardian, I immediately realized that this was going to be another formulaic thing where we fight a boss, part of a group, at the end of a dungeon, whereas the others are chilling somewhere else, which makes the scenarios feel extremely artificial as usual, unfortunately for the series. Up till now, they were portrayed as a ruthless organization, showing no mercy to anyone, and here it feels like they were. Prior to this, they felt important and like a real threat, but now they just seem like helpless fodder. However, one thing that did pique my interest during this chapter was Elaine's storyline. On the second day, she disappears even if you team up with the Bracers. She came across Melchior to offer him a deal, which would make things more exciting. She upholds the deal by stealing 5 cards from Ario, and then facing Van so the cards could go to him. How exactly this made the game more exciting is questionable, but Melchior upholds his end of the deal by providing concrete evidence of the identity of Almada's biggest investor, the Quincy Company, and its CEO, Edmund Auclair, Elaine's father. We find out that he even provided extra funding to help them create the nuclear weapon used in Cray. Foolishly, he didn't even know that his funds were used for the bomb and was manipulated into thinking it was funds to further restore the monarchy of Calvard. Before the Calvardian Democratic Revolution occurred, Calvard used to be a monarchy similar to Erebonia now with noble houses and commoners. House Auclair used to be one of such prestigious noble houses. Edmund claims that he did all of this solely to overthrow Calvard's democracy, which would eventually somehow lead back to Calvard becoming a monarchy again with the help of Almada, though he was completely blinded by his greed and did not know that Almada never cared about achieving that goal, and only used it as a means to receive additional funding. For the past few years, her dad's actions have been suspicious to Elaine, and she has been looking for the right time to strike and expose her father's corruption. This is why she was willing to cooperate with Almada, and why she pushed herself so hard during this carnival. This whole time, her father was one of the main motivating factors for her to become a bracer, so she could find more details on Van's disappearances and also to expose her father's misdeeds. Having taken advantage of the situation in Oracion, she is finally able to achieve one of those goals, though the other still seems out of reach. If Almada was the disappointment for me in this chapter, Elaine's plotline was the thing that kept me going. It was incredibly captivating and masterfully written to call back on what we learned in Forward Sword in Hand.
This sword has become something of a legend. I understand why you were shocked to see this in my hands. Allow me to enlighten you. This very blade was passed down to me. I had the right of its inheritance. I was born by the name of Gerard Eldarion. I am a descendant of the royalty that once ruled Calvard. Therefore, both it and the throne are rightfully mine. You must be curious as to how a descendant of the royal family still lives and stands before you. That is because I was taken into the care of a cult that is now extinct.
So what exactly are you all trying to accomplish here?
Are you attempting to restore the Republic's monarchy? Or are you following in the footsteps of the cult?
Neither. I care nothing for the country's revolution 100 years ago, nor do I care about the increasing number of immigrants welcomed through its doors. And I will not leech off the teachings of the cult like a parasite, as my parents once did. I'm afraid those things bring me no fulfillment whatsoever. I am not the kind of man who obsesses over past glories, nor do I desire to rebel against the goddess. Everything that drives a human being to action, friendship, work, envy, love, all of it holds no meaning, just an endless source of frivolity and tedium. So I sought a diversion, a reprieve from this vapid world. And I found just the answer I was looking for, the ultimate source of reprieve. Fear. You cannot deny that our neighbors in the Erebonian Empire prospered greatly as a result of conflict. And much like conflict, fear is a fundamental component of human nature. Life, death, order, and chaos can only exist because of fear. It is at the heart of everything, the foundation upon which all else exists. Once I learned that, I began my lifelong pursuit to seek out fear in its purest form and instill it in everyone.
So, in one fell swoop, we find out that Gerard is a descendant of Calvardian royalty and also a former high priest of the DG cult. However, his status and former cult ultimately mean nothing to him, as what he seeks is not related to either. He spells it out quite clearly. He seeks to instill fear onto people in its purest form, and personally, I found this quite strange at first. It's pretty simple but also incredibly ambiguous at the same time. It's vague enough to the point where interpretation can vary a lot from person to person, because Gerard doesn't concretely specify further why exactly he wants to do this. In fact, he presents examples of how fear affects societies and people. Right after, he also explains how he believes that fear is at the foundation of everything and emphasizes its importance to humanity and their nature. His speech is unbelievably compelling, not only because of the voice actors who did a fantastic job, but also because Gerard's arguments make sense. But the thoughts that lingered with me after the dialogue and during the boss fight was why? What even is the ultimate fear? What would an everlasting fear even look like? Why instill fear into people, or more specifically, for what purpose? After Almada's questionable decision-making for this entire carnival, I wanted nothing more than to find out what in the hell this madman was thinking, and what the deal was behind the actions he took to get to this point. Before summoning Grendel, yet another strange thing happens with Mare again.
Mare to the rescue! Okay, Van. Hope you're ready to...
Yeah. Ready to go.
Okay. Sharkswell. The Grendel's all yours!
Ah, there it is. I was wondering if you would pull the same trick again. So that must be your nightmare, then.
What just...
Something's interfering with her AI.
Air Bear, snap out of it!
Oh, this is all wrong! This isn't who I am! This isn't me!
As we now know, Dante's goal here in Alracion was to experiment with the Sixth Genesis, but also to find the original owner of the diabolic core, Van. He insinuates that he had already guessed that Van was the original owner, and after facing him head-on, he confirms that it is true. Due to the time limit set by Gerard, Van is given no choice but to neutralize him immediately to stop any threat of the bomb activating. With their victory, Arkwright Solutions obtained the Sixth Genesis. As for Melchior, he's not up for a fight at the moment, and escapes as the last bigwig for Almada, vowing that they will meet again eventually. Well, that was my thoughts on Chapter 5 overall. I don't mean for this to seem extremely negative for the sake of being a contrarian. I know that Chapter 5 is often regarded as a lot of people's most favorite chapter from this game, but I couldn't get into it as much because of these reasons. And I hope you can understand my point of view. All in all, I really liked the idea behind this chapter, but I found the execution underwhelming, which led to me losing a decent amount of interest around halfway through. At least the Link story was interesting, and I do believe that it was the best part of this chapter. With Almada gone and only 2 Genesis left, Van raises an important question to his employees.
Things should be back to business as usual before long. There's still gonna be plenty on our plates, especially in the short term. But it's about time you guys started thinking about whether or not you want to keep working here.
Although he provides strong arguments as to why his members should consider moving on, they don't appear to be willing to do so. Even though Van was sincere about what he said to the group, he purposefully didn't mention his main reason for doing so. Even Judith picks up on this and calls him out for it. He wants to leave them out of it the same way he left out Elaine and Renee 7 years ago. It's a very bad tendency he has had for a while and has caused a lot of trouble. Ironically, while talking to Burgard, he even mentions that people's natures don't change easily. Since he is his former student, Burgard immediately noticed that Van's toxic habit had not subsided after all these years. And of course, it goes without saying that the person who has been here since the start of this journey also noticed this.
I should have known. You were pushing the boundaries of legality even as a teenager. So the festival came to a close, and the student council elections were held in May. That's when Elaine became the next president, and when you dropped out, I assume. You did it without warning, too. Without so much as a single discussion with anyone beforehand. So, how right am I? Well, I know the average school year at RMS, so I just put 2 and 2 together after seeing the way you talk to them. That, and these last few months have also done wonders for my personal growth. I used to be this shy little girl who was afraid to leave her comfort zone. Someone who couldn't even speak her mind to the one family member she wished she could the most. But now, I feel like a whole new me. I can walk a little further, and I've learned to say what's in my heart. I have everyone here to thank for that. But most of all, I have you to thank for that.
After the entire group interrupts them, he lightly apologizes for his previous statement, and the party gets ready to do some work before the upcoming festival. They even end up finding Dingo's secret notebook, containing very detailed bits of information on every main member of Almada. There's a lot of information in it, which I will gloss over, but what is evident after reading it is that Dingo was determined to put a stop to Almada's plans. On the surface, Dingo was a very calm and collected guy, but he had been continuously haunted by deep regret because of his time at Almada. In his own words, if he had let his feelings take way, Dantes could have filled every page in his notebook. Back when Enrique was still in charge and his reputation among them was diminishing, Dingo contributed to his murder by providing Gerard the information he needed to overthrow his leadership. This case meant so much to him that he was even willing to take, as he describes, the biggest gamble of his career. Later, the Solutions Office and Renee go on a mission together to find some remnants of Almada who were spotted in Edith. During it, we get more details on Van's past, which confirms certain information, but also raises questions all the same. We find out that Elaine and Van did actually have a romantic relationship together, but it didn't last after Van unexpectedly dropped out and left Elaine and Kincaid some half-baked letters apologizing for his actions. Unlike last time when he was forcibly adopted by the DG cult, Van seemingly did leave by his own will. He states that there were a bunch of reasons why he dropped out, however the true reason why he did is purposefully left unknown, and it's evident that there was definitely more to it that we don't know yet. And even later when asked by Elaine, he still can't give a straight answer as to what happened.
If I'm allowed to stay on this subject, then please at least answer one question for me. Not why you left us behind. Why you wouldn't let us help you. I know we were at that age where we weren't quite adults, but we weren't children either. Maybe we couldn't have helped much even if we tried. But it's been 7 years, and all of us are grown now. And we're not the only ones who want to help you. All of your part-timers do too, along with so many others. Is there nothing we can do? Can you still not rely on us?
Sorry.
Elaine.
Anyway, they find the thugs, but something interrupts them.
Van?
Pull yourself together, you mischief maker!
Got it, Renee. You pampered prince!
Don't you call me any part of that ever again.
More help arrives and it's decided that a party will take place at Montmartre. It was also really heartwarming to see a bunch of Van's clients gather together to thank him for his help. To see almost every client we helped out throughout the entire game share how their lives were impacted by our actions was so rewarding and fulfilling. It really made me feel like my decisions via the alignment system and the time I put into these quests actually mattered. Though the party at Montmartre allowed everyone to relax after the recent months of chaos caused by Almada, the archdemon that appeared earlier and Van's gut tell him that things aren't over just yet. And the next morning, the office receives an email from C saying that the 7th Genesis will appear at the festival tomorrow. Well, it's festival day in a finale chapter, which of course means there's about 3 hours worth of side content to do as usual. Where everyone is happy, the children are smiling, their parents can give their backs a rest, the characters are reflecting on their journey together, and all is well, until it isn't, as usual. Edith enters a state of pandemonium with many people besides a few exceptions being frozen completely.
Holy guacamole! Real beasties!
That being said, the whole sequence of the Genesis Tower emerging while at the same time enveloping the statue of Sheena Durka in the Von Tail district was really cool. I really like the steampunk-esque aesthetic too. It kind of reminds me of how the main engineering building in Zeiss looks like, even if it's lacking the gold accent. I also imagine that the aesthetic is similar to how Orbital gear and whatnot looks like back during its early days, similarly to how the Genesis look. Dante's and Arioch are back from the dead, and the other members also were resurrected or forcefully brought here by the 7th Genesis. Thus begins an excruciatingly long, and in my opinion, most boring part of the game, where we have to take back all 7 districts of Edith that were available in this game by doing a bunch of semi-combat encounters, many times, while very tediously regrouping with each member of the office and a few other characters who rotate in and out after every single district. This part felt like it dragged forever. It was Trails being formulaic at its very worst and was only made interesting by a few hints and tidbits throughout, like Van slowly realizing that the only people who are not frozen are the people he knows, and some other character moments. That being said, I'm not quite sure myself what ideas can even be thrown to make this part less of a drag. If you look at it another way, I'm sure there's a lot of enjoyment to be had from seeing all of the people we met throughout this game work together against Pandemonium and whatever else. But again, to me, it just got so boring real quick, simply because of how repetitive it was. Trails being known as formulaic and predictable didn't come out of nowhere. Once 2 or 3 members join back, it's pretty much a given that the rest will be fine, just like any other time this series has done this angle of splitting the main cast up. It doesn't leave much room for anticipation of what could come next, except when the mold is somewhat broken up by an interesting event every now and then, but never goes farther than that. If you have played all of the previous games, you will know that shit doesn't really hit the fan until near the end of the game, aka by the time we are already in the final dungeon. And this is not that. So 3 hours or more into this Edith demon cleanup, and we are still building up for that climax near the end. Like I mentioned, there are some breadcrumbs, but even then they don't bear fruit in this game, instead serving as a, oh, remember that from a while ago, once it is eventually revisited next time. Which is why I don't really want to recap this whole part by saying X person hints at this and then have to say nothing because it's set up for later, so I'm going to skip most of this part. However, I do want to mention this one because I thought it was really funny. Eventually, with the ASO making steady progress, Melchior decides to add another barrier around Vontail and a time limit. This situation allows Qasim to prove why he's known as the strongest warrior in Zemuria, by charging an Orbal weapon with a bunch of Orbal energy, and Celeste treats this as if it's one of the most improbable feats she's ever seen, and it single-handedly justifies why Qasim is known by that title. Which seems completely ridiculous because before that he was just counting the percentage of how much he had charged his Buster Lance. There is a slight shake to the screen, but it doesn't keep rocking further, nor does the sound effect of the charge get louder, both of which would ideally indicate that more charge means it's harder to handle, and that there is an enormous amount of power within it. Watching it back now, it seems to me that mayhaps this was a poor attempt to make Qasim look strong again like in Chapter 5, but instead, because of how anticlimactic the whole scene looks, Celeste's comment, and the bombastic music playing to contrast, I found it absolutely hilarious. Well, whatever. They shoot a hole in the barrier, and the crew and the blue truck arrive at the Vontail district, where Elaine one-shots a big demon and joins them to break the pillars blocking the entrance to the tower. Depending on your alignments, different peeps will show up to help the ASO, and a few others including the President, who I thought had a pretty cool entrance. With their help, they can now enter the Genesis Tower, but Elaine didn't make it in time, so it's just the Arkwright Solutions crew who are now tasked with taking down Almada.
Looks like this is as far as I can go. Van, I won't make you promise that you'll return safely. Just promise me that you'll do what you believe is right.
All I will ask is that you do your duty. You may consider this an official request from me. You have witnessed both sides of this country. That lets you do what no one else can.
Okay, I got it, Elaine. And you don't even need to ask!
Dad! Elaine! We'll come back safe and sound, I swear it!
The Solutions Office has experienced quite the journey, and the pillar that kept everything under control throughout was none other than Van. But after numerous failed attempts at trying to undermine his assistant's feelings by trying to take on everything by himself, he has finally opened up his eyes a little to request help from his assistants. And with the hopeful final dungeon track to pair, it seems like the tides are swinging back in our favor.
The cause of all our problems, and the truth behind what's happening, is waiting for us up above. And I gotta get there, no matter what it takes. But I realize I can't do that alone. So please, give me a hand.
Did you just ask us for our help?
Our dead-obsessed leader is pleading for our aid? Ha! Hell must be freezing over.
For real? You're finally letting us repay what we owe you. I truly never thought I'd see the day.
I didn't either. It makes me so happy.
Me as well. I was beginning to believe I would never hear those words from you.
Too bad they come at a hefty price. You're gonna have to pay us back 1,000 times over.
You little... Fine. But I ain't settling for any more than double.
Don't worry. We're not asking for anything in return. But we do have one condition. We will give you a hand if you let us help you the entire way through. You have many wonderful friends in your corner and powerful allies to call on. But you often throw caution to the wind all the same. Can you promise us that you won't do that this time?
Okay, it's a promise. But I want you all to remember that we ain't heroes of justice. There's no shame in turning tail if things go to shit. The fate of the world's important and all, but our lives are too. We ain't gonna throw them away. Know your limits, and don't worry about what's black or white. That's the Spriggan Creed, and we're gonna follow it like always. So, here's the plan. We're gonna kick Almada and the Garden's sorry asses. They may be back with a vengeance, but we've beaten them all once. We can do it again. After that, we're gonna settle the score with Melchior and Dante's, once and for all.
Since I did mention Resonance of Ray, the final dungeon track, I will do the obligatory glazing session for this tune. I remember on my first playthrough, I was so astonished by this piece that after just 3 loops, I decided I just had to increase the music volume all the way to the max. It's just that good. Besides the beeps and boops sounding like we are ascending to heaven, the story of a video game track is just as important. I love the balance of somber and hope here. I like to think that during the somber parts, we are meant to reflect on the numerous trials and cruel events that we had to endure, while the hopeful parts are there to remind us that overcoming them is so damn worth it for each and every single member of the Arkwright Solutions office, because of the bonds, feelings, and personal developments they cultivated throughout their journey. The visual appearance of the tower further lends to this track, as the main color that stands out is the golden yellow on the inner walls of the tower. It's a radiant and breathtaking visual that gives this feeling of grandeur fitting for a device as important as the Genesis, which also has accents of gold on the edges similarly to this tower. As for the venture through the dungeon itself, it's standard. It's actually pretty long, but simple with a few barriers requiring the activation of a leather thing. Climbing this massive tower felt more like a victory lap while hearing Resonance of Ray in the background. I especially like this one section where you climb a really long curved staircase for no other real reason other than to make the moments feel even more majestic. I know I haven't mentioned Viola, Alexandre, Olympia, and Arioch much, and I won't delve into depth about all of them specifically, but they deserve at least a mention by this point. All of them to certain degrees have sympathetic backstories, but indisputably have done reprehensible things in their lives. I did like each of their stories in this game individually. I even thought they were quite compelling, though I do take issue a bit with how it's done. I feel that it was a bit awkward and artificial, as the 2 pairs we were given don't really have any specific reason to be teaming up with each other, and the resolution of their character arcs happened in very quick succession, that it all sort of blends together, resulting in a payoff that felt underwhelming in general. I personally would have liked to see more of an interwoven relationship between all of the members of Almada, as they all seem unnaturally distant from one another, which was especially the case with Dante's. While we did find out what impact Gerard had on Viola and Alexandre when they were recruited, I think that should have been reinforced at least once throughout this entire game, even maybe to the former members of the Gardens to really display the influence he has on this group. But by the time we fight those members in the Genesis Tower, they are for the most part only there to find conclusions to their unresolved threads from Chapter 5. And feel like cannon fodder rather than meaningful boss battles, as the office had already defeated all of them in the previous one. This is also a repeat of the same issue I had near the start of the video, where I complained about how repeating the same thing in outcome over and over again ends up being obnoxious. which is why I said that their resolutions all blend together, since their blueprints are all for the most part exactly the same in this finale. Even though I felt that their stories were interesting, in the grand scheme of things, I find that these boss battles lacked significance that contributed to the unfolding story and the final dungeon itself. Beyond serving as conclusions to their arcs, there isn't much of a purpose for them to be there, except as extra boss battles before the two final bosses that actually felt like they mattered.
Welcome, friends! How good of you to come. You sure took your sweet, sweet time. What's wrong? Lost your sense of urgency now that the countdown has stopped?
Screw off.
Melchior is quite the puzzle of a villain, actually. I've seen all sorts of sentiments on his character. Some people love him for being unapologetically evil, others outright dislike his one-sidedness and think he's boring, and there are more who are sort of in between. I'd say this outcome was inevitable. He loves inflicting suffering onto people and doesn't care one bit about mortality and such. The reason he can come across as boring is because Melchior essentially doesn't change one bit throughout the entire story. If I had to sum up Melchior's character progression in the last 60 to 70 hours, it would basically be blank. Melchior is so puzzling because he is so simple on the surface. He doesn't doubt himself, he doesn't question what he's doing, and there isn't any sympathy to be found from his backstory, because all we know is that he was a member of the Order of the Moonlight Horse ever since he was a child, maybe even from birth. There is seemingly no nuance to his nature. This is simply what he loves doing, so he keeps doing it. If you were to try to find deeper meaning in his character, I think it lies in his role in the story. Melchior is, after all, the only one out of the main Almada members who left Aracion alive. Why exactly was he not chosen to be a guardian during the carnival, and the one who would unveil Pandemonium? Well, I don't know, because there's no reason given. But he also serves as the main recognizable bridge between Almada and the Solutions Office throughout the entire story. Melchior was the very first member of Almada we saw get formally introduced, and he was present in every single chapter except the Intermission. He was the living embodiment and symbol of Almada for us before we met Gerard, learned his backstory alongside the others in the same chapter. In my opinion, this makes him a pretty great villain for the audience to latch onto, since there are layers to all of the other Almada members which wouldn't be revealed until late in the game. Thus it makes sense why he's so simple in Daybreak 1. I think it would have been a lot more boring for the purpose of the pacing and story if Melchior had more depth as a character. He values life so little that he even willingly gives up his own, and what's even crazier is that even after he loses, he clearly doesn't regret his decision and trusts that Dante's will defeat them. Even when approaching death, his nature doesn't shift one bit, and that really shows how unimaginably messed up he is.
Well, whatever. There's no telling what the future has in store. I hope it involves all of you suffering the most gruesome deaths imaginable. I want you all to succumb to fear and despair.
At least there's a bit of satisfaction to be had with putting down such a despicable guy, but even then Melchior spoils that by withholding C's identity, who he figured out in record time, somehow.
Blood relative of Epstein. You really like getting under people's skin, don't you, Dantes? Actually, what do we even call you now? Don Dantes? His Highness Prince Dantes? Or High Priest Dantes of the DG cult? While we're at it, let me ask you something else. Back in Aracion, it didn't seem like you knew for sure that I was your target. But that's changed now, hasn't it? Have you been waiting for me specifically all this time? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like all of this pandemonium nonsense was just a ploy to draw me in.
What?
Van is close, though Gerard fully reveals what his plan was this whole time.
Bringing you here was merely one part of my grand scheme, not the focal point. My primary goal is, and always was, to create and spread pandemonium throughout the world. My ambitions lie beyond the ruined kingdom and the fallen cult. Even Almada was simply a means to an end. The day I stole this power from you, my very reason for being changed forever. I will expose the true form of this nation, as well as this continent. A world hinged on lies. And I will do so by taking the form of ultimate fear. It all began 11 years ago, when I received a curious report from one of our lodges. They captured a boy who was born with a demonic element, and they were attempting to extract it by any means necessary. The members of the DG cult were out of their minds. Not that I'm in a position to judge, of course, but to them, no idea was taboo. Anything was fair game as long as it furthered their goal to reject the existence of the goddess. Nevertheless, the vast majority of their misbegotten schemes came up empty, but on occasion, they would happen upon a gold mine. And their crowning achievement was finding the diabolic core.
Right from birth, Van had been in possession of a diabolic core. After being kidnapped by the DG cult, Dantes had it extracted so he could take it for himself. However, Van still retained his status as the original vessel of the core, which is why he was able to transform into Grendel, a restrained version that separates him from his true Demon Lord form, though supposedly this could only be achieved with the help of Mare. Before receiving this power, Gerard was ambitionless. He had no goals to strive for, and cared little for this world.
Before that day, I had no dreams nor ambitions to speak of. I led a hollow existence. But the moment I laid eyes on that core, I instantly came alive. I was drawn to its radiant beauty, and I was sucked in by its blackened splendor. I welcomed it into my body, and then I was reborn.
The demonic elements changed Dantes completely as he gave into its power, which eventually led us to where we are now, closer than ever before to manifesting the core's full potential so you can spread pandemonium further with the help of its former owner. Now, I do apologize, but I'm going to break the immersion of the enveloping story here and go on a bit of a tangent. This, for me, literally right now, is the very last bit of voiceover I have to record for this video, because I've been stuck on this part of the story for such a long time at this point. The reason this happened was because my feelings on this sequence of events are quite complicated, and I wanted to get it out of the way now before we make our way to the finish line. When I was at this point in my playthrough, to be honest, I was still confused on why Gerard was so set on bringing forth pandemonium. My questions from Chapter 5 after his speech in Arasion still remain the same. In fact, he made me even more skeptical after he says this.
I will expose the true form of this nation, as well as this continent. A world hinged on lies.
It's the main thing that bothered me during that speech in Chapter 5. His goal just seemed sort of anticlimactic in the grand scheme of things, and pretty odd, so I was expecting a twist or some sort of revelation at this point. Instead, Gerard doubles down on his wants and reveals a bit more about his backstory. Sure, I could say that it's just in his nature to be evil and want to do this, similarly to how it's in Harwood's nature to inflict pain and misery onto the world, but they aren't really the exact same. Harwood is for the most part a sick bastard who finds his vile deeds entertaining and fun, whereas to Dantes, fear is the driving force behind his life's philosophy, as before coming upon the diabolic core, his life was meaningless. On the other hand, the way they both perceive their natures is quite similar. Harwood and Gerard understand that they are unnatural compared to most people who can't fathom their wants. Dantes on the surface isn't motivated at all by extrinsic motivations like money, fame, praise, nor many intrinsic ones like curiosity, envy, love, personal growth, or passion. He's a man who was genuinely dissatisfied with the state of the world, which he perceived as boring until something actually brought satisfaction to his life. It's a motivation that is incredibly difficult to sympathize with. Though it's only natural that someone like him eventually came around. If there are people who are unnatural, then there will be unnatural people like Harwood and Dantes, whose wishes in life will come across as incomprehensible to many. More to the point, Gerard has no doubt in his mind to question his philosophy. He is a purely evil man, and that's sort of it. However, after this line, I doubted that even further, since Dante said that he realized how monstrous the diabolic core was now that he no longer had it. I initially thought that this meant that Dantes had been corrupted or his behavior had been amplified by the core, But it seems that this was a misunderstanding on my part, as he was likely more so referring to the core's underlying power, that being the manifestation of Van's link with Vagrant's diaspora, and whatever exactly is his nightmare that has been mentioned so frequently throughout the game. I really do like Dante's, and I do wish I got invested just a bit more into his character while experiencing the story. I do have to admit that all of this was likely my fault, as I was expecting something the story wasn't yet ready to present, which led to a bunch of misunderstandings on my part. Now, since I have played all the way up to Horizon and have delved deeper into the lore of the Calvert arc, I have come to a better understanding of what exactly is going on in this whole sequence, and I do have to say that it's actually very well thought out and is incredibly interesting. Due to these very specific reasons, I don't expect that many others experienced the same thing I did, because again, it was likely my fault. Looking back, I do wonder how it would go now if I could wipe my memory and play it again with my current mindset. However, obviously there's no changing that, nor the way I felt during this part in the moment. Nevertheless, let me get back on track with the story, because besides everything I just mentioned, I thought the rest was really cool. Especially so because of this exchange between Van and Dante's right here, which fully reveals how Van has viewed himself in spite of everything that has happened these past few months in the story, so much so that he even apologizes to Gerard for causing all of this.
I'm sorry, Dante's.
What?
I'm guessing you weren't always quite this twisted. You lived a life bound by your birth, and after that, you were forced to rely on a cult of lunatics who you wanted nothing to do with. Then your luck went up in smoke, because you met me. The core inside me changed you forever. What happened to Cray, Dingo, and those who died in Arasion, and even Pandemonium itself, all comes back to one troublesome punk.
Van, that's not...
That's bullshit and you know it.
This isn't your fault, Van.
The world does not revolve around you, Van Arkwright. I have walked this path of my own free will, and every choice I've made has been mine, and mine alone. How dare you imply otherwise? I will not stand to be pitied by the likes of you! Once you finally breathe your last, the final factor will be unleashed. And then the diabolic core that dwells within me will become whole and return to its true form. At long last, you will finally be mine, empty husk.
Not if we have anything to say about it.
The crap that's coming out of your mouth is as dumb as your hair, asshole!
We cannot and will not overlook what you are saying about Mr. Arkwright. You take those words back!
I won't stand for you calling Van an empty husk. He's a wonderful human being.
And he's someone who is dear to us all.
Now that I know you're beyond saving, I can take comfort in finishing you off one last time. And I'm not just doing that to get my core back. It's a Spriggan's job to take out power-hungry bastards when no one else can!
How amusing! I look forward to seeing you try!
So that is the diabolic core.
Looks like my theory proved true. The core will soon be made whole once again. Though I'm afraid my curiosity is getting the better of me. I think I will perform an early test run.
malevolent god.
Just like the tyrant. No, this thing's on a whole other level.
What is this?
Yeah, it's overwhelming is what it is.
Not bad. Not bad at all. If this is merely a taste of the power I will soon wield, I cannot wait to see what I can do once the core is whole. Even the Society's strongest enforcer will be nothing more than an ant at my feet.
Get your ass out of bed, Mare Bear! Stop being a lazy bum and do your damn job!
You didn't have to make such a racket. And for the last stinking time, stop calling me Mare Bear!
Mare! She woke up.
Oh, what are you talking about? I was awake this whole time. I've just been kinda out of it while I was repairing myself. So, that's what you're up against. You've come a long way.
Still can't remember who you really are, but I do know the role you've always fulfilled. So like I said earlier, I need you to do your damn job.
Sure, I can do that. But is that really what you want?
Yeah. It's exactly what I want.
Wait a moment. What are you doing?
Did you say roll? What does that mean?
Well then, Van. Will you wake from your dream? Or not?
Just what is she saying?
I will. I'll wake up.
Van, no! You can't!
These fragile chains guide me to this realm, where I am now made manifest. I am both the nightmare and the beast that devours it!
There is a lot that can be said for this sequence because of the overwhelming amount of hidden meaning that can be interpreted within almost every sentence of dialogue, the prompt you get before Van dons Grendel Shin, and the monologue that follows after. Unfortunately though, just like the game itself, now is not the right time for me to explain what it could all mean. So, let's just enjoy the moment and unmitigated evil as Van and Gerard's voice actors go completely ham.
Well, whatever. It's about time we wrap this up. I'm kinda curious to see which of us befits it the most. How about we go toe-to-toe and find out?
Very well. Have it your way. I will gladly devour both you and your restraints. You have sealed your fate, Van Arkwright.
Nah, you sealed yours when you stole my shit. And I'm about to take it back!
Since the core is now separated from him, Gerard realizes how out of this world the diabolic core truly is. And as Van states, it's something that no human should ever possess. With the recovery of the 7th Genesis, Gerard's plan and Pandemonium have been put to a stop. However, Van had already decided that if things were to come to this point, he would take the core and himself out of this dimension. Despite his speeches and promises before, his bad tendency had crept up yet again, feeling the need to shoulder everything himself while disregarding everyone's wishes. Van is a massive hypocrite because he doesn't value himself. Each time he receives a compliment, he has to downplay it, but he maintains his cool act even though on the inside he doesn't feel that he deserves any praise. To him, he's just trying to help out so he can rectify the trouble he and his diabolic core have caused, and help others who are in dire straits like he once was. This is the reason why he has such trouble realizing that the people around him do actually care about his well-being and always wish the best for him. He has a genuine heart of gold that makes him want to help others, and as a consequence it attracted many people to him that are thankful for his contributions. People see his example, and yet when it gets to a point where he needs help like they once did, Van will lie, hide details and important information, act unbothered, be unable to share the truth, avoid confrontations, refuse direct help, and worst of all, he will disregard the feelings of the people close to him. He exhibits all of these to a certain extent throughout the entirety of this chapter, and given his interaction with Mare, it's likely he had already prepared earlier to undergo the sacrifice. However, unlike the previous 2 times, the group he had cultivated is given a chance to save him, and they take it with no hesitation at all. Van had contributed far too much as a mentor to all of his younger members to the point where their relationship had become inseparable. Van thinks that the best way to preserve their hopes, dreams, and futures is to keep Vagrant's diaspora sealed away. But the threat of that happening is not a concern to his companions, as what would be the point of letting the person who helped them grow as individuals rot away by himself in the middle of nowhere? And Van's assistants make sure to vent out their frustrations and also express how they feel about it.
We're not going to leave you, Van! You may have chosen to come here of your own volition, but we've made a choice of our own. We're taking you back!
You know full well I'm not like the cops or bracers. I do things my own way. And that way isn't black, but it definitely ain't white either. Mine's like the color of a dark blue sky just before dawn.
I'm not going to become a wholly different person if I stay by your side. I'm very much my own woman, and that's not about to change. Your way isn't black, white, or even gray. You said it's like the color of the dark blue sky just before dawn. But to me, it's like the dawn itself. It's a warm, comforting light that illuminates our way and breaks through the darkest nights. And I never want to part from that light again. We aren't going to let you go, no matter what.
You wanna up and leave us that bad, huh? Well, normally I'd say, that's your call, so long, my dude. But you've still got an outstanding debt, so I'm not letting you bail on me.
Yeah, I'll drag you back by the collar if I have to.
Let us help you, Van. You always stick your neck out for us, so why can't we return the favor? If we were in your shoes, you'd rush to our aid without a second thought. Don't deny it.
I'm afraid he's got you there, Mr. Arkwright. I can easily picture that happening. If any of us were in danger, you would move heaven and earth itself to ensure our safety.
Once a softie, always a softie. Honestly, you should drop the whole I'm not good or bad thing. You're just a teensy bit too young for the weary warrior act, don't you think?
Everyone. Why? You have actively forged many bonds throughout this year. I'm afraid this is simply karma at work. Don't think you can run away from them so easily, young man.
Master.
And to further prove their determination, once the Demon Lord himself, Vagrant's diaspora, takes control, it doesn't sway them whatsoever.
Yes! Will you kindly disappear already? We were talking to Van, not you! We don't care about you in the slightest! So get out of our sight, and return Van to us at once! The Genesis are reacting!
What's happening now?
I see. So you have their power at your disposal. That explains how that was able to bind me.
I think the Genesis are having an effect.
Yes, I can confirm that its strength has decreased.
Good. I think Van's body is still somewhere inside of it. We just need to weaken it a little more.
Just let me at it already. I'll rip it to shreds!
Our odds of victory have increased exponentially.
The Genesis also, for an unknown reason, are able to weaken the Demon Lord, and because of that, eventually Van is able to escape.
Insolent vessel! Dare oppose me!
Oh, I dare, all right! I'm busting out of here!
Evidently reinvigorated earlier by his assistant's pleas, he encourages them to go all out and release their frustrations onto the demon, since they are technically one and the same. And once he does, the game lets us know it's time to win, because the song from the opening is now playing. Though they are victorious, of course they have only repelled the devil for now, as the Demon Lord promises to Van that one day he will return to haunt him again.
But remember this, you and I are one and the same, and we always will be. As long as you live, you will never know peace. You had best not forget that.
But for now, he's content with returning to a normal life in the meantime, mending his relationships and finishing Agnes's request, even though he knows that inevitably, one day the demon will come back. Though this time, he knows in advance that he has many people who will help him. Things are in fact so normal that just like in the beginning of the game, Agnes bribes Van again with some sweets.
Leave us alone. Also, I've got a delicious Andalusia winter tart. Limited edition. You can share it with Dad. I'll brew your coffee while you chat away.
You gotta be shitting me. When the hell do you kids get so damn sly?
For me, this final chapter delivered when it mattered most, and with it came a satisfying although open-ended conclusion that would no doubt need a few sequels to wrap up the remaining loose ends. As I implied from my comments, it was still strong despite my issues. The start was pleasing, then it became incredibly tedious for a few hours in the middle, and then pretty good again come the finale where the really long build-up for Van paid off immensely. However, when it came to what I thought of the game overall was where my dilemma arose that I mentioned all the way back in the intro. But before I get to the conclusion of this video and tell you my feelings as a whole after the finale, I want to do some speculation in regards to the mysteries this game leaves even after its end. For the sake of keeping this video spoiler-free of Daybreak 2 and Horizon, I will be talking as if I don't know any information from those games. The Arc Genesis and a bunch of details in the plot of this game are noticeably vague or flat-out unexplained. Though of course I don't believe for a second that they are plot holes or that Falcom just couldn't be bothered to explain why certain things turned out a certain way. And I'm not talking about how we still don't know exactly what the Arc Genesis are or what Mare is. That will obviously come later. I am more so talking about the plot points that really confused me during my first playthrough due to a lack of explanation for them, like for example, why Almada was in possession of some of the Genesis and how they were able to track down the rest. To recap, the first Genesis was about to be sold to Almada before being stolen by Giacomo. Almada was already in possession of the second by the time they had massacred Ada's units. The merchant from Longport received the third Genesis from Heiwe and had it stolen later by Almada. The fourth was attached to the monster in the underground waterway in Tharbad, which was then stolen by Olympia. As for the 5th, 6th, and 7th Genesis, they were already in Almada's possession and we don't know anything past that. I guess it would also be important to mention that the 8th was not present in this game and for good reason, since it's an outlier among the Genesis. And in Daybreak 2, we find out pretty early in the game that Almada was also in possession of this Genesis. I have more I want to say about it, but I won't spoil it any further. Of course, it's hard to believe that all of these Genesis just happened to be present in this specific time frame, and that Almada had decided to start using them only now. There's also the question of how they even found out how to use them in the first place, as no other character throughout the entire game, including tech geniuses like Catra, Cronkite, and even LaToya Hamilton, a disciple of Epstein, were able to deduce how they truly operate. For such an integral plot point for this arc, it's not hard to deduce that the Genesis ending up in the hands of Almada likely wasn't pure coincidence. This is another thing that is kept extremely vague, but for good reason. What we know at the moment is that it's a demonic element that holds enormous power, and that it had resided in Van from the moment he was born. The main thing that confused me about the Diabolic Core is that I misunderstood what it actually was. The Diabolic Core is, for the most part, not a physical object that binded Van to vagrants, rather a physical manifestation of the link between them, or at least something along those lines. While Dantes was able to use it, the core was still linked to Van and most definitely is his power. To go on a bit of a side tangent unrelated to the core, I have no doubt that a bunch of people, myself included, immediately noticed the similarities between Gerard's Overlord appearance and McBurn's demon form, of which we saw for the first time in Cold Steel 4. Now of course it wouldn't mean much if only the appearances were the only similarities, except of course that's not where they end. While we do first learn of this concept in Sky's second chapter, it's in this scene 7 games later where we get more clarification on the Beyond, a place that exists outside of Zemuria and operates on its own laws, otherwise known as the Divergent Laws. Whenever something crosses over to Zemuria from the Beyond, it is usually something completely inexplicable, like the infamous Salt Pail incident that occurred in Northumbria 30 years before Daybreak 1. It's also important to mention that the ones who discovered the core were the DG cult, the same cult which developed Gnosis, a drug that frees people of the world's shackles as described by McBurn, but more specifically the Red Gnosis, which transforms whoever consumes it into a demon as well. Joachim was one such person who consumed the Red Gnosis, and what he had to say after his transformation rings true to what was said during that scene in Cold Steel 4.
心地よい。今こそ我は全ての真実へと至った。世界のあり方、その秘められた意図も。
気を確かに持て。そんなものはまやかしだ。真実というのはそう単純につかめるものなんかじゃない。
それは単に人の身の限界。我には全てが見えるのだ。キーヤ様の失踪のからくり、そして貴様の兄の死の真相も、クロスベルの地に課せられた避けられぬ運命も。
Since Gnosis had already been developed in the year 700 of the Septium calendar, the DG cult likely already had some degree of knowledge of the Beyond, and the Divergent Laws by the point Van had been kidnapped. All of this is likely why and how they were able to extract the core and bestow it onto Dantes. Even though Dantes didn't consume Gnosis, his appearance might suggest that he underwent a similar transformation into a form like McBurn's, which would also suggest that just like Joachim in Zero and McBurn in Cold Steel 4, he was able to see the world in a different way as opposed to regular humans, and this is the biggest chunk of information we got out of him during that state.
You may have won this fight, but my ultimate desire will still be realized by your hands. I already know for a fact that Gehenna does not exist. But I'll still leave you with these parting words. I will be watching you from its depths, Van Arkwright. It won't be long until you become the living embodiment of fear itself.
Though we are missing a bunch of pieces to the puzzle, and probably will for a very long time, to sum up this section, the core and the Beyond will be extremely important plot points moving forward in this arc, and even more once we get to the next one. Now it's time for the big one. To no one's surprise, the Arc Genesis will be one of the most important components of the entire arc, as it's blatantly hinted that they are incredibly abnormal devices, which were created as a means to stop the end of Zemuria. On the final page of his notes, the one who created them, Professor Claude Epstein, states that if the Arc Genesis are not recovered until the year 120X, then the world will come to an end. How these devices will be used to stop the destruction of the world and what would even cause it in the first place is left a complete mystery, but we do know their fundamental function. The track associated with the Genesis explains it in a pretty quick and short way: a vessel for observing the world. One of the things that were developed using the data from their observations of the world were orbal arts. As an example, the second Genesis was used to create healing arts such as Tyr. What's more curious is that the Arc Genesis were able to trigger the manifestation of Mare, who is a whole bag of mysteries herself and the Grendel. While their origins and natures are unknown, what we do know at the very least is that Grendel is a shackle that separates Van from Vagrant's diaspora. Earlier in the story, Mare told Van not to overuse Grendel too much, and once he summoned Grendel for the first time in Tharbad, the restraints had unloosened to the point where Vagrant's diaspora was able to speak to Van directly.
There is no need to bear any nightmare, for you are already one made flesh.
As for Mare, as stated by Rosette, she is likely here to monitor Van. The scene that reveals the most about her by far is the confrontation in Durham Memorial Park, where she says some very intriguing things.
I'm being gracious enough to lend you a helping hand as a under the influence of the What's this? Are you recording what's happening here? I see. You humans do think of some fascinating ideas. Even if your methods are a little primitive. Just be careful. Using it too much will cause...
Mare implying that our technology is primitive, that she is controlled or influenced by something, or maybe someone, and referring to the Solutions Office specifically as humans really gets the brain going in particular. Also, as a side note, the track that is used whenever we enter the phase space with Mare is called Captive Soul, which is a pretty accurate way to describe Van's circumstance. But I also think its dark and oppressive tone might foreshadow a bit of the truth behind this whole trifecta of mysteries. As I'm sure you can likely tell from this extensively long video, I am deeply passionate about this game and the arc surrounding it. But with it came a very odd issue that is hard to present from the jump without making it sound silly. So instead, first I will pose a question to you, the viewer. After having finished a video game or some other art form, have you ever had to tell yourself that it was better than what you actually thought of it? As I have mentioned numerous times throughout, I loved the first 3 chapters of Daybreak 1. A lot. By that point, I was unimaginably infatuated with the game. It had addressed a bunch of gripes I had with the series, the story was captivating, and the game itself was fun to play. I was so fascinated with it that I was even telling my fellow friend who also likes Trails that it was one of the best gaming experiences I have ever had at that point, and was hoping that come the finale it would not only dethrone my favorite game in the Trails series, but maybe also my favorite game of all time. Partially, it was this silly yet toxic need that made me forcibly ignore the issues I had with this game, instead telling myself that Daybreak 1 had indeed become one of my favorite games of all time. But even as I was telling myself that, I knew deep down that it wasn't true. I was fixated on the parts that I loved, yet couldn't admit to myself that I couldn't say the same for the rest. This was the main reason why I immediately started Daybreak 2 without waiting for the official Western release, because I wanted to escape from this feeling and instead find out what happens in the next installment as a sort of reprieve. Instead of applying what I had learned from my experience with Dark Souls 2 to form my own opinions and to express what I had truly felt about the game, this would bother me a lot. I would constantly keep thinking about what my actual feelings were on the game, and whether my gripes were not only nonsense because I couldn't find anyone else with the same issues, but also because this was the series I had invested hundreds of hours into, and yet for some reason only now had I come away with such a feeling. I watched a bunch of YouTube videos and read loads of forum threads to see if there were even a few others who came away with this indescribable mixed feeling, but in the end I couldn't really find a satisfying answer and ultimately came away with nothing by the end of this month-long search. After failing to find an explanation to my problem, I put it on hold as I just wasn't able to understand what it was. In the meantime, I played some other games while that thought still lingered. But, eventually, a few months later, the fan translation for Beyond the Horizon was fully completed, and I found myself unable to resist starting it immediately. And after finishing it, I came away with an abundance of feelings and emotions yet again, not only because of the game itself, but also because I had finally taken a step forward to resolving this issue. I will not speak on what I think about Horizon right now, but what did happen was that I was finally able to properly understand my gripes on Daybreak 1 and Trails as a whole, since a few of them also popped up in Beyond the Horizon. Except this time I was actually able to articulate most of them on my own and be confident in my assessments, since I was also in the midst of writing those horrible reviews on my Excel sheet that got a bit better over time, I suppose. Suffice to say, I had for the most part found the answer I was looking for, and it was quite the rewarding feeling in the end. I know I have been speaking for an absurd amount of time at this point, so I will summarize what my final and actual opinion is of the game as of this moment. I still like it, and think it's pretty good. I really like the parts I fawned over, and didn't like the parts I criticized. Despite those gripes, I still look at this game favorably. If I had to dumb it down even further, and perhaps give you what you were wanting this entire time, then I suppose I could give a score. But don't take it too seriously, since it is the most quick and simple way to sum up your very large experience into such a small thing. I would give it about an 8 out of 10, I think. Kind of. The rating will change eventually, obviously, that's a given. But it also might change a fair amount once this arc concludes, depending on the final game in Calvard, and the myriad of other possible variables. Naturally, you would think this is the end of this story. I was able to realize that I had subconsciously suppressed my subjective opinions on Daybreak 1, and was able to move on by accepting what my true feelings actually were. Except, not really. After going through all of this, what I wanted to do was make a video essay on my feelings on Daybreak 1 as a sort of challenge to myself, to prove that I could competently serve up my own interpretation. Though at first the vision of this project was a bit different. In the beginning, it was meant to be a compilation and analysis of each and every story bit, piece of dialogue, or character that I found either fascinating or bothersome. In the long run, this amounted to pretty much every single part of this video, which went in depth into these exact moments I wanted to discuss. Later, I realized that there was no possible way to cohesively explain my thought process and mindset without retelling the events of the story, and this eventually led me to doing a sort of partial recap of the entire game. But even then, the project lacked the idea, my main message that I wanted to convey, which was at the core of everything that motivated me to make this video. Eventually, many months passed and the project's progress had started grinding to a halt, and I didn't even know what I wanted to make anymore. I was starting to lose the willpower to continue this project as I had given myself too much of a Herculean task without even understanding what I had come away with from this experience. Throughout the entire process of making this video, many doubts arose in me on whether my interpretations or personal gripes would even make sense, or would be perceived as flat out ridiculous and that I just hadn't realized it yet. There were many points where I would get writer's block or question whether my essay could even match those of the YouTubers or essayists I highly respected. However, art, and video games especially, simply mean too much to me, to the point where even though I was filled with these negative thoughts and emotions for a while, I still wanted nothing more than to share my ideas. And eventually this led me to the realization of what was the actual root cause of all these feelings as a whole. As we all know, works of art and by extension video games are partially objective and subjective. Objectivity is when something is judged without biases, personal experiences, or our preconceived notions, something that is examined with facts and only indisputable facts. On the other hand, subjectivity is when something is evaluated through a person's biases, personal feelings, or emotions rather than facts. Now, although works of art are partially both, that doesn't mean that they mix with each other to the point of being indistinguishable. To objectively examine a work of art would mean to only assess what can be proven with indisputable facts. Things such as technical performance, graphical fidelity, the number of bugs, and so on. By contrast, a large portion of a video game's aspects like game design, art style, the emotional impacts of the story and music, can only be evaluated through a subjective lens. As I mentioned not too long ago, at certain points during the process of making this video, I started to become afraid of whether my interpretations or opinions on certain aspects of the game could be redundant or misguided. And if you remember even further than that, at the start of this video, I complained about the destructive criticism Dark Souls 2 had wrongfully received, since much of it stems from objectively incorrect assessments of the game and very poor arguments. I also provided my opinion on why I think these videos are terrible and didn't work because they had many issues. To me, some of them even seem to be trying to be objective evaluations of the entire game or its subjective parts at times, which is of course not possible because the interpretation of art is of course inherently subjective. And then it hit me. Wait, why the hell was I so worried about being wrong about my very own subjective opinions this whole time? Yeah, this whole time my dilemma was that even though I knew subconsciously what my subjective opinions were of Daybreak 1, for some reason I felt that they were incorrect, and instead forced myself to think that maybe my opinions were wrong simply because other people liked the parts I didn't like, or vice versa. Of course, this doesn't mean that subjectivity is a shield for shallow interpretations, or insufficient arguments for my or anyone else's opinions. We have to be capable of providing our lines of reasoning and substantiating them. Not only is it a basic necessity for essays, but also for healthy discourse on subjective topics. While I didn't write many of my points with this completely in mind, I still think I was able to provide clear points on why I felt a certain way on the things I touched on. So I'm not going to give 50% of this video a facelift after having come to this realization, but I will try to do better and incorporate better structure into my future work. Honestly, it is very silly and embarrassing in retrospect that I didn't realize or remember what I learned from Dark Souls 2. However, I'm pretty confident in saying that now I know exactly why this happened. In the case of Dark Souls 2, there were many people who shared my sentiments on the game itself, and the inflammatory critiques surrounding it. In Daybreak 1's case, there weren't many critics or people who shared my exact sentiments and gripes. At least I wasn't able to find many who did, nor did I engage in discussions with people who have actually played the game, thus the reason why I began to doubt my own thoughts. I think this situation highlights the importance of critics and discussion. Just like in my case, many people can walk out of an experience without really being able to put into words why they felt a certain way about it. However, great critics and healthy discussions can help you understand the meaning behind those feelings by offering their perspective and serving arguments to create a meaningful interpretation. Great critiques can also help give meaning to things you consciously didn't even realize or understand at first. These moments are why our opinions can change and why our subjective points of view are not set in stone from the moment we finish a work of art. What I finally realized after 5 months of the initial start of this project is that not only was I a complete jackass, but also that I simply spiraled into a cycle of doubting my own interpretations because I couldn't find a critique online that addressed my very specific opinions, nor did I engage in proper discussions with others. Looking back now, my fixation on making this video and the previous ones were mainly fueled by this desire to finally end this miserable cycle, and now months later, I can definitely say it was worth it. I never could have imagined that the making of this video could have brought such fulfillment. Not just because of the self-discovery, but also because of the engaging discussions I've had and the people I met along the way. I also hope that my critiques of certain parts of Daybreak 1 may help other people too. Now, of course, I'm not saying that I am a great critic, nor is this video necessarily a good critique. My interpretations may have seemed shallow to you, and perhaps they are. So if you have any counter-arguments to my points, honestly I would love to hear them. Before I start wrapping this video up, I think it's also important for me to highlight how destructive criticism can be really harmful to the reception of a work of art. In the intro, I briefly touched on why Dark Souls 2 had a lot of baseless critiques and misconceptions. The main thing I want to point out from these critiques is that subjectivity is not an excuse to be factually wrong or unfairly judgmental. The reason why I take issue with these critiques in particular is because when watching these videos, you will find many incorrect facts or shallow interpretations of certain aspects of the game. To showcase them, I will display a few examples of destructive criticism by using a really good video by the Firelink Conspiracy, who made very good observations and arguments as to why these criticisms are really poor. Admittedly, this part is a bit out of the scope of this entire video, but if anything, treat this section as an exercise to see if you can understand why the criticisms displayed by these creators are incredibly toxic. Though if you don't really care, feel free to skip to this timestamp. First, subjectivity does not excuse the complete misinterpretation of a story, or dismissing, in this case, a cutscene as entirely pointless when there is meaning behind it, and when it does serve a purpose.
The first major problem with Dark Souls 2 happens less than a minute into the introduction. Rather than being booted directly into the character creation screen like the previous games, this one waits until after an opening sequence before asking you to make your character. This means the character's identity has to be hidden by their clothing until that point, but they do a really poor job of this since the character's build obviously looks male. Once you arrive at things betwixt, you can even take your clothes off and confirm it. Not only that, but there's an utterly pointless flashback sequence which also indicates the character is a guy as well. You could maybe pass this off by saying it's not a flashback of the player character, but in that case it has no reason to exist. It feels tonally out of place in the Souls series, which has always left the player character's history up to players themselves, and completely conflicts with any female characters.
The critique starts out on a bad note, as Matthew misses what the cinematic is about. The narrator says a hallowing undead eventually forgets the memory of his very birth. It is a poetic, surreal concept. It's as though every memory fades from his mind in reverse chronological order until he becomes no one. Thus, the scene in question depicts his early memories melting away. He is the baby being cradled by his mother, and not, as Matthew suggested, the husband of the woman.
Second, it also does not excuse assuming what developer intent was behind certain decisions if you cannot cite a source or when your arguments are bridled with misconceptions.
It feels to me like difficulty was a big focus in Dark Souls 2, which is a crucial misunderstanding on the part of the new directors of this game, probably helped along with some pushing from Namco, who have enjoyed playing the difficulty card for marketing purposes since before the release of Dark Souls.
Back on the topic of difficulty as an integral part of the Souls series, the original cover art of Demon's Souls is a dying knight wearing the same armor as the protagonist of that game's opening cinematic, and of the Knight class, which is the first option offered to the player. Also, as Matthew points out, the complete edition of Dark Souls 1 is titled Prepare to Die. Death is also integral to the lore, to the world building, to the story, to the themes of the Dark Souls series, to Demon's Souls, Bloodborne, and Elden Rings too. The death of the player character is canonically integrated into the mechanics of their universes. Matthew ignorantly portrays all of this as an issue, and not only that, as an issue exclusive to Dark Souls 2, and baselessly claims that Bandai Namco must have asked the developers of Dark Souls 2 to ramp up the difficulty for marketing purposes, portraying them not as artists who made a deliberate decision that also goes in line with the design philosophy of the series, but as cogs of a machine who had to compromise their work for the sake of appeasing a publisher.
As an added bonus, I wanted to include a clip from this video by Feeble King, because it has the exact same issue as the clip I just presented, except it is even more inflammatory and blasphemous. Here he presents a very toxic case where he assumes that the developers of Dark Souls 2 didn't even like Dark Souls 1 and just copied what they thought the players liked. It is just such a disgusting way to undermine potential artistic intent and the care that developers put into video games.
Either the player will learn new ways to interact with a mechanically challenging game that is a satisfying experience, or in Dark Souls 2's case, the player will realize that the developer intention was for them to die a lot no matter how much they try to learn, which just isn't fun. It's not good, it's bad. Bad game design is heightened when you die to a cheap death, and the penalty is a lot of time wasted. Dark Souls 2 is a bad game. The people who designed Dark Souls 2 do not enjoy Dark Souls. The developers guessed people like Dark Souls 1 because the game was hard and players died a lot. Since they didn't understand why anyone would enjoy such a hard game, they just made a series of thoughtlessly easy boss fights with no mechanical depth and surrounded them with the worst boss runs in the series, and made the player have no iframes to do anything just to kill them more. There are so many great ideas and moments spread throughout this game, but the developers wanted to ruin each and every great moment with another cheap death.
Subjectivity also does not excuse you for being bad at the game if you vehemently refuse to learn and adapt, when the game is in fact trying to teach you.
Dark Souls 2 is the only game where I went hollow, where I gave up, not even at a boss, mind you, just at a random place in the Crown of the Sunken DLC, but I have a duty. I have a duty to anyone who has ever loved Dark Souls 2 to finish the DLC for this video and make Dark Souls 2 great again. Okay, I just reused that joke.
I've seen a lot of negative DS2 reviews, but still haven't seen a DS2 hater that understands how to play Souls games. Imagine being in the DLC and still greedily trying to open chests without dealing with the surrounding enemies first.
Send another pyramid and open a chest that I kept dying at.
And then imagine repeatedly dying in the same situation without considering if you could do something different. That's how DS2 haters actually play.
This dude straight up admitted to carelessly running through a late game area over and over again, attracting the attention of every enemy along his path, ignoring the area's mechanics, only to try and open a chest while they're chasing him, and blames the game for it. There's this one place as the Forest of the Fallen Giants, the first area of the game, where the game teaches you shouldn't rush through it with your brain turned off, but explore with care and attention. There are about 10 enemies leaping around, who wake up once the player walks near them, a mechanic that was introduced in the previous section of the map. The smart player will soon realize the gimmick and wake them up one by one. The stupid player ignores them and runs around carelessly, waking all of them up at once, gets ganked for it, and dies. If, God forbid, you end up watching one or more of these garbage videos about Dark Souls 2, see if you can spot a clip of the YouTuber get destroyed by this beginner area as they complain about the game. Many of them have won.
And finally, constructive criticism should absolutely never involve objectively wrong statements without proper research beforehand.
This is to say nothing of the sometimes wildly inaccurate hitboxes on bosses and enemies, which sometimes teleported me into a grab from several feet away. Some overhead attacks from the bosses leave me with the impression that the hitbox on some of their weapons is 5 times wider than the actual blade itself.
His complaint about hitboxes is also misguided. Yes, some grabs can look silly, but with one sole exception in the entire game, it's not an issue with their hitboxes, but with their animations. In every Dark Souls game, there's no transition between when the player is free to when he's grabbed by an enemy. That would be way too difficult to animate, but as a result, grabs seldom look disjointed and can lead the player to feel as though the game cheated. This is a real issue, though a minor one, but it is present in previous games too, as well as in Dark Souls 3 to a lesser extent. The only bad grab hitbox in the entirety of Dark Souls 2 is the mimics. Dark Souls 1 had a couple bad grab hitboxes too, such as the Iron Golems. The other examples of supposedly bad hitboxes he provided really aren't worse than most in Demon Souls and Dark Souls. Other people have made videos to prove it, objectively, so I won't extend myself on this point.
Like I mentioned before, there are tons of issues with all of these videos, but I think that's enough examples for now, and if you want to see more, then I would highly encourage you to watch that video. In a way, I was also extremely afraid to repeat the same mistakes I criticized and saw from these videos. It's why I use the words I believe, personally, to me, in my opinion, for me, I think so incredibly frequently, and tried my best to present my arguments fairly in respect to Daybreak 1. Even if that was my intention though, I probably did screw up somewhere. At the very least, I hope for most of you my critiques didn't come across as either arrogantly wrong or shallow, and if they did, please feel free to criticize me. Well, I've been avoiding it this whole time, so it's about time for me to address the title of this video. In the intro, I mentioned that at a certain point, single-player video games had become stale to me, and I couldn't figure out why for the life of me. Even though I really enjoyed parts of the games I played from Reverie till now, I still had that irksome feeling which persisted all the way till now. That feeling that I just couldn't get fully engaged into the games I was playing, even though I was really enjoying them on the surface. I put a lot of emphasis on my experience with Dark Souls 2 critique on the internet because it really made me realize what I was missing and needed this whole time while playing those games and making this video. It's incredibly silly in retrospect, but I really needed a hard lesson on how to actually think critically for myself. I don't think that it would be hyperbolic to say that, like many people have experienced at least once, I spiraled into the rabbit hole of constantly changing my opinions on works of art, simply because some video had a lot of views on YouTube, or an online influencer was trying to sell a narrative. This was especially the case on the Souls side of YouTube, where an epidemic of really poor video essays plagued the scene just when I had become a massive Soulsborne fan. I am ashamed to admit that I was easily influenced by these videos. Even if my actual opinions differed, all that mattered was that the critic touched on one subject I had a gripe with, and then I just perceived them as some sort of professional who is actually incredibly intelligent. I can't emphasize enough how dumb it is looking back now, but that simply was the reality of my critical thinking back then, so it was quite the culture shock when my mind finally opened up, for God's sake. Suffice to say, I'm really happy that that reality is no longer the case. I had a really narrow view of video games and art, and I wasn't able to appreciate the various complexities that come with them, such as thematics, imagery, concepts, artistic intent, and so on. My very limited outlook caused video games to become stale to me, because it had reached its breaking point, its maximum threshold. I would say change was inevitable once it came to that point. Now, that doesn't mean I've reached infinite wisdom or anything like that. I'm still a dum-dum. I recognize that this video is very shallow in a few areas, But I am content with putting it out as a first step to getting better, and I hope to do so because I'm genuinely passionate about art and want to appreciate its richness even more, whether that be analyzing a work extensively or being able to appreciate something I couldn't before. To finally sum up, while Trails Through Daybreak wasn't the sole factor to this whole story, it was the core component that jump-started this journey of self-discovery into full effect. I'd like to state again that I think my story shows the importance of critique, discussions, and how coming to your own interpretations of works of art can be crucial for a healthy mindset, especially in the current landscape of the internet, where many people feel obligated to tell you what you should and shouldn't like about video games and art. Through my playthrough of Daybreak 1 and the making of this video, I was able to understand this dynamic a whole lot better, and a lot of other really cool things came of it as a result. My experience with Trails Through Daybreak has forever changed the way I will approach video games from now on, by making me better understand how significant critical thinking is to not only being able to experience a work, but also appreciate it in its fullest form.